I help people commit suicide, but they have to convince me first. My life has seen me work all sorts of strange jobs due to the restless, wandering nature of an adult who can't settle down. But this profession is definitely the strangest. I opened this establishment a few years ago after my girlfriend took her own life. She used a pistol and splattered her brains across the bedroom wall. Most people think that would make me want to avoid death as much as possible. But everyone deals with grief in their own way. As for me, I thought I should offer others a better option. I make them comfortable, then lull them to sleep. Honestly, I just don't want anyone to walk into their bedroom after an exhausting shift and witness the scene I saw that day. Since I'm not a cold-blooded murderer, my price is simple: $5,000 in cash and a convincing argument as to why I should help them end their lives. In that argument, I look for something very specific. Some try to tell me tragic stories about how no one in the world suffers more than they do, while others weave tales so repulsive it's clear they just want me to kill them for society's benefit. To keep my conscience clear, I need to be sure that they truly have no hope left for the future. If I'm not satisfied, I'll package up the money and send them on their way. Actually, I turn away more people than I accept, not because I'm afraid of getting caught, mind you. The police in this town are well aware of the small operation I run. They just don't shut me down because they themselves make up a significant portion of my clientele. Mostly older officers who have seen too much, hardened now to the point where they can't live normal lives anymore. I think law enforcement here likes knowing that I'm always an option for them if things get bad. Tonight, however, my potential client is Dr. Miles, an elderly gentleman with long strands of silver hair streaked through his dark hair. The days are shortening, and it was late afternoon when I invited him into the apartment, so I was quite surprised to see him wearing dark sunglasses. I started my usual greeting, but he interrupted almost immediately. "Please put these on, for your safety and mine," he explained, hastily pushing a similar pair of dark glasses into my hand. "Oh, all right," I stammered, putting on the glasses to cover my eyes. "You can set your things over there and take a seat." I gestured toward the living area of the apartment. He dropped a heavy briefcase to the floor and stepped toward the armchair. But I stopped him. "Please, sit on the sofa. You'll want room to lie down if we decide to go through with this." He followed my instructions, letting his clearly exhausted body sink into the soft cushions. I took my usual position, a hard, structured chair I pulled from the dining table and placed perpendicular to the sofa. Sometimes this arrangement makes me feel like a psychiatrist, especially when I'm really lost in a story. "Do you have what I asked for?" I asked once he seemed settled as one can be when they're seeking assisted suicide. "Yes," he said calmly, reaching into his briefcase and handing me an envelope full of cash. "However, something tells me you're more interested in my story." I felt my face flush at the implication, because it was true. I suppose I'm a little crazy too, but stories are far more important than money. I need money to live, yes, but stories give me a reason to keep living, if that makes any sense. "If you want a story, young lady, I certainly have one for you. It might sound insane, but I can assure you it's absolutely true," he whispered, tracing his fingertip along the outline of a sofa cushion. "Sir, I've heard a great many things," I reassured him, crossing my legs and sitting up straight, preparing for what was to come. "You don't need to worry about that." "Well," Dr. Miles began, "I'm a physician, practiced for many years. I've always been comfortable with the predictability of the human body. Sure, things can go wrong, but anatomy, physiology, these things operate on reason, and I like reason." He paused for a long sigh. "Go on," I said, leaning into the conversation. Now I'd been seeing this particular patient for a few months, and she was absolutely convinced there was something terribly wrong with her. "Lumps," she said. There were lumps forming in her armpit area. Normally, that's cause for concern for a woman her age. Could be breast cancer, swollen lymph nodes, all that. I felt the lumps. I found them soft and mobile, not hard and fixed, as one might expect if they were truly cancerous. But she just couldn't be reassured. And I knew I wasn't going to get off easy. I scheduled her for an ultrasound, just so she could see for herself that there was nothing to worry about. Bodies develop lumps as we age, you know. I thought of the skin tags and other anomalies that had grown on my own grandparents, likely to grow on me in the future. "No effect, right?" I asked. Dr. Miles chuckled softly. Damn right, no effect. She was back shortly after. She refused to accept it. It must be cancer, she said. They just can't detect it for some reason. I looked at the results myself. I saw the lumps were there, but they certainly weren't malignant. I thought they were just lipomas. Do you know what those are? I shook my head. No. You're young, it's reasonable. Lipomas are tumors, but they're basically harmless. They grow slowly and are made of fatty tissue. They mostly cause cosmetic concern, but if they grow too large, they can impede other structures in the body. I suggested this diagnosis to her, but she was beyond reason. Eventually, I just offered to cut her open and remove them if they bothered her that much. She practically fell to her knees, begging me. Please, doctor, take this cancer out of my body. Dr. Miles was practically sneering. What happened next? I asked. I wish I'd never done it. I don't have many regrets in my life. I have a beautiful wife, 3 children. My life has been pretty good so far, but what saw me, it changed everything. He looked close to tears now, but reined himself in enough to continue. Anyway, the day of the surgery came. It should have been a quick in-and-out procedure. She was anesthetized, and once I had her on my table, I felt the lumps under her skin again. I noticed the mass had filled out a bit, and I felt it had the lobulated characteristic that some lipomas have. When you dissect a lipoma, you either get something that looks like a neatly packaged sack of fat, or you get something that looks like a cluster of fatty grapes. Now, those are harder to get out and more prone to growing back, but still perfectly normal. The mental image of squishy, dripping fatty grapes made my stomach churn, but I gestured for him to continue. I had to know what could have been in that woman's body that brought him to my sofa tonight. When I cut her open, it wasn't like that at all. Not at all. Lipomas are pretty superficial, but I found myself having to dissect through more connective tissue than usual. Finally, I felt the surrounding tissue give way, and I used my probe to expose the mass. And then I saw it, them, whatever they were. The growth consisted entirely of eyeballs, tiny, twitching eyes staring in every direction. He illustrated this by pointing his finger up and down, left and right. The pupils contracted immediately as they were exposed to the operating room light, and then they all stared at me all at once. He looked like he was about to vomit. I thought I might too. I've had my entire hand in necrotic tissue. I've seen all sorts of things that could turn the stomach of a stronger man, but I'd never seen anything like that. I panicked. Instead of removing them from her, I just sewed her right back up and transferred her to the recovery room. I didn't even check on her when she woke up. I just left. I contacted hospital administration, told them I needed to take some time off, a family emergency or something. I don't think my job is waiting for me, he commented, exhausted. Not that I even want it anymore. Anyway, years of perfect surgeries and one operation turned me into a complete madman. Honestly, sir, I think that would break anyone, I countered, trying to soothe him as much as possible. He gave a short laugh. I thought I'd be back to normal after a few days off. What I saw couldn't possibly be real. I thought perhaps I was having a nervous breakdown, he declared with an exaggerated shrug, but the more I sat and dwelled on it, the more I knew deep down, it was definitely real. My entire life has revolved around reason, logic, order. My work suited me in that way, but now I don't know what to expect, ever, and it's driving me insane. A long silence hung between us. My behavior started to worry me about a week ago. I was out for a walk to clear that image from my mind, clear it from my mind's eye, from my imagination. He corrected himself quickly. I was walking down my street when I saw the local stray cat, the calico I'd always been fond of, but when I saw it that morning, I was just filled with a sense of revulsion, nausea, because of its eyes. Its damn eyes were too big, glinting in the early morning light, mocking me. What did you do? Did you get away? I cautioned. I got away, all right, but not in a way I'm proud of, he offered, full of remorse. Again, I've heard it all, I explained. Last week, a guy sat in that exact spot and told me about killing and dismembering his neighbor's baby. Right, I lured it into a side alley and just stared at it for a long while, my mind filled with confusion. Confusion led to anger. At that point, I lost control. I just took my thumbs, and he made a popping sound with his lips, and gouged them right out. I hate to admit this, but it made me feel instantly better. Just the cat, I urged, needing to know. So far, yes, but I can't stop thinking about it. This obsession, It's consuming me. I can't look at anyone anymore, especially not my wife or my 3 daughters. All I see when I look at them now are their eyes, distorted and magnified. I have to use all my willpower not to take a spoon and plunge it right into their sockets just to end the madness. I think he started crying behind those dark glasses then. You don't know how hard it is, and I know I'll never get better because even though you're wearing those glasses, all I can think about are your eyes, and how good it would feel to just squeeze them out of your skull. I shifted slightly. It wasn't often a client threatened me so indirectly. And I'm sorry for that. I'm so sorry, but it's true. Please, you have to help me, he whimpered. At that point, I was satisfied. His debt to me was fully paid. Please, lie down on the sofa now. I'll prepare the injection. I won't go into great detail about the entire process. It all feels rather mundane to me now. First, I prepared the syringe, then found a vein. At that point, I usually ask if my client has any last words before we begin. Dr. Miles's words were, "Please don't look at me when I die. I want to die in peace, and I know I can't do that if I know your eyes, if I know you're looking at me." I didn't. I respect my clients too much to disregard their final wishes. When I was sure he was gone, peacefully, I removed the dark sunglasses. The countless scratches, swelling, and bruising surrounding his lifeless eyes confirmed what I already knew. He had tried to gouge out his own eyes before seeking my services. This truth only further solidified my judgment. There truly was no hope left for him. Part 2. I mentioned last time that a significant portion of my clientele comes from law enforcement, mostly people whose dedication to their work eventually destroys them. Coincidentally, my client last night was also a police officer. I was completely baffled when this particular man sought me out. He was a high-level detective with a powerful public presence. From the outside looking in, he was a man unshaken. That's the interesting thing about my profession. I'm one of the few people in my clients' lives, often the only one who truly gets to see inside them. However, I have a rule: never turn away a potential client until I've heard their story, so we scheduled a meeting at my place. He wanted to see me immediately. When he arrived, he looked nothing like the steadfast man I'd seen on TV. He was clearly in a hurry, so we went straight to the living room. I already had the usual arrangement set up, and I took my place on the chair while he perched on the edge of the sofa. "Can I smoke?" he asked. I hopped off my chair to retrieve an ashtray from the windowsill. "It's all right. I try to make my clients as comfortable as possible in their final hours." "Thank you," he said. "I hear you're a kind young lady. I really appreciate that." "It's truly all right," I said, sitting back down. "Before we begin, did you bring the money?" He nodded as he reached inside his jacket, pulled out an envelope, and offered it to me, handing over the cash. He lit a cigarette and flicked the spent match into the ashtray. "I haven't smoked since my kids were born, but I guess things are different now." I took this last answer as an opportunity to start. "So, what exactly has changed recently?" I observed him, weighing the question in my mind, trying to find the right starting point. He took a long, exaggerated drag from his cigarette. "Well," he began, exhaling a plume of smoke along with the word, "I just broke the biggest case of my life." I tilted my head. "Excuse me, sir, I'm not sure I understand." He chuckled softly in response. "I'm not sure I do either." His eyes followed the smoke rising from the tip of his cigarette. "I'd been on this case for years. It had been a cold case, so it was difficult to crack. A little girl here one day," he clenched his free hand into a fist, then opened it with a magician's flourish, "gone the next. It's been 10 years. I nodded in response. I interviewed everyone: parents, teachers, friends' parents, neighbors, hell, anyone who'd ever had contact with her. I worked day and night weekends. My wife was gone by then, and my kids were grown, so immersing myself in work wasn't a big deal anymore," he explained, pausing to take another drag. A long column of ash had formed on the tip of his cigarette. I urged him to continue. "So, when did you get the break in the case?" "Today." "The when doesn't bother me as much as the how asterisk," he clarified, crossing his arms over his chest. "All right, how did you get the break?" I cautioned, thinking he'd be rather excited to finally have answers to his obsession. Damn, I thought so too, but life has a funny way of giving you exactly what you want in the worst possible way. I was on my way to follow up on the first legitimate lead we'd gotten on this case in years. I make a habit of always arriving early, and I realized I was near my daughter's neighborhood, so I decided to stop by for a quick visit. I'm very close with my kids. After my wife passed, we had to stick together. The three of us were all that was left of the family. I'm glad you had each other, that you could help each other through such a terrible time, I remarked. Yeah, it was good, he grumbled. My daughter's car wasn't in the driveway, but I noticed my son's car parked across the street. My daughter is a bit private about her home, so that was a surprise. He flicked a clump of ash off his cigarette. I decided to check it out, and I found the front door unlocked. I leaned forward, and your son was there. I called for him, no answer. I almost left, thinking maybe they'd taken her car out for errands, but I noticed something that convinced me otherwise. Her keys, phone, and wallet were scattered on the kitchen counter next to a salad bowl. I couldn't imagine my son going anywhere without at least his phone and wallet, so I started searching the house. I gestured for him to continue as I asked if he found him. I tore the house apart, up and down the stairs, but he was nowhere to be found. I was at a dead end until I stepped into the laundry room. I discovered a rug pushed aside, revealing a door. It was open, and I saw it led down to a basement. And then I found my son, his body lying motionless at the bottom of the stairs in a spreading pool of blood. I gasped in response. He fell down the stairs, was my first thought. I rushed down the steps, eager to assist my son. The moment I touched him, I knew there was no hope. He was gone. Not only that, but he had a gaping wound in his neck. My eyes widened. I never could have anticipated that, but what happened next was even more unexpected. He paused his story, piquing my curiosity. He stubbed his cigarette out in the ashtray and immediately lit another. I found my little girl. Your daughter, I urged. No, not my daughter, he answered gravely. In the back corner of this hidden basement, I found the little girl I'd spent 10 years looking for. She was huddled in the back of a blood-stained dog cage, and she was, he recalled, his voice trembling, she was repeating to herself, good girl, good girl, good girl. He crumpled, weeping, surrendering to anguish. I wondered if my son had realized who she was, what he'd found before she mauled him to death. I put my hand over my mouth, my jaw dropping. Why was she locked down there for so long? I asked, not sure I truly wanted to know. I don't think he wanted to answer either. He locked his eyes to the floor as he inhaled from his cigarette. I knew I would find out soon enough because at that moment I heard my daughter pull into her driveway. I nodded, silently acknowledging. My daughter was in hysterics when she realized what had happened, what I'd discovered. I had to handcuff my own daughter. Do you know how hard that was for me? He demanded, pointing an accusatory finger at me. It's horrific, I offered, though I knew nothing I could say would be enough to soothe his depleted spirit. He softened slightly, shaking his head gently. Later, during the interrogation, she confessed everything. My daughter had kept this little girl as a pet, locking her in that basement in one of those giant dog crates. She wrapped a heavy collar around the girl's neck, bathed her in a large tub, and made her relieve herself on newspaper-lined crates. Lord, I can't stop thinking about how some of those very newspapers must have reported on the girl's disappearance. His voice choked a bit there. He flicked ash off his cigarette, steadying himself. She even fed the girl raw meat. My stomach turned at the thought. My daughter explained that she was utterly enchanted by the little girl because she was, and I quote, happy and carefree, a perfect little puppy. He scoffed, his disgust palpable. One day, she stalked the little girl, carrying a damn leash. I found myself clenching my fists as I braced for the rest of the story. She approached the unsuspecting girl, jingling the leash in her hand. She told the little girl she'd lost her dog and asked if she could help find it. That poor, innocent girl. Of course she agreed. He fixed his eyes on the floor before adding through gritted teeth, my daughter even had the gall to say that the little animal didn't know it at the time, but she was the perfect puppy mommy had been looking for all along. I shivered. That's horrific. The man exhaled deeply. You can say that again. My daughter hit the girl in the head with a rock and carried her limp, unconscious body to her car. By the time the girl woke up, she was trapped in her new prison with that thick leather collar cinched around her tiny neck. I stared at him, disbelieving. Over the years, I guess she broke her. She kept her muzzled after the neighbors started hearing barking. He paused to stub out a cigarette. She insisted that her pet loved her, needed her. She beamed with pride as she explained that the girl would whine and sometimes pee herself with excitement whenever she went down to cuddle and play with her. He seethed. his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white with disgust. She said she did it because she wasn't allowed to have a dog when she was little, and from there, the obsession just grew more twisted and depraved. A dog wasn't enough anymore. "Go on," I found myself ordering. He took a long, deep breath before continuing. The little girl could have been kept in that damn cage until the day she died, though death would have been a mercy by that point. But my daughter hadn't properly secured the muzzle when she left the house that morning. I can only speculate what happened next. I gestured for him to continue. My son stopped by to return the salad bowl he'd borrowed from my daughter. She wasn't there, so he probably let himself in with the spare key. He exhaled a long pillar of smoke before stubbing out his cigarette. Once inside, he must have heard the faint sounds of a dog barking and whimpering, which he followed to the concealed door. Thinking an animal must have gotten in and perhaps been injured, he must have fetched some tools to cut the lock. I can only imagine the horror he felt when he found the little girl. He probably released her from the cage, the same thing I would have done. And then she lunged at him, tackling him to the ground and tearing out his throat with her teeth. A heavy silence descended on the room. "Sir, you can't be." "Don't," the man cut me off quickly, harshly. "Please, just don't," he added, his voice softening. "I've gone over all of it countless times in my head." Our eyes met for a moment before he immediately shifted his gaze. "I'm the worst." About a year into the case, I stopped by my daughter's house unannounced. I was only there a few minutes before she practically pushed me out the door, citing a migraine. "My daughter can be moody, but never rude," he insisted. Only now can I make the connection. I'd heard faint dog whines, as if from a distance. When I asked her if she finally had the dog she'd always begged me for, she rushed to explain that a neighbor was fostering one, and then she asked me to leave. I wish I could explain the look on his face as he divulged this to me. I can only liken his demeanor to Atlas carrying the weight of the heavens on his shoulders. "I assume she'll at least plead guilty, right?" I offered cautiously. The man waved his hand in an exaggerated shrug, letting out a sudden, guttural laugh, a crazed look appearing in his eyes. "Plead guilty at what trial? Did I say I called for assistance? Took her down to the station? Perhaps a better man, a better cop would have. As for me, I made her confess. After she told me everything, I beat her so brutally she didn't even look like my daughter anymore, because she wasn't. I chopped off all her fingers with gardening shears. I guess I was trying to give her claws, perhaps. And then I strangled her with that damn leash before tossing her down the stairs to rest with her beloved pet. I called to report the scene, and now I'm here." I didn't know how to respond, so I said nothing. The man looked me squarely in the eyes as he stated, "Something has changed in me. I no longer seek justice, only retribution. My past work is now just a sick joke. What good did I do as a cop? I strangled the life out of my own daughter. The criminal that had eluded me all along, and it felt better than any arrest I'd ever made. It makes me wonder if I always had this in me, and I doubt I can stop." "Now that ends your story beautifully. Thank you, that's all I need. If you're ready, I'll prepare the injection." The man sat silently, smoking his final cigarette, while I collected both my composure and my instruments. He stubbed out the cigarette in the ashtray, and I instructed him to lie down. As I settled in to insert the needle, I asked, "Any last wishes?" Could you please turn on the radio or something as I go?" he stammered. I can't get my daughter's voice out of my head, not the way she sounds now, but as a little girl. She wouldn't stop asking me for that damn dog. I fulfilled the request, but I don't think it helped. As he slipped out of consciousness, he repeated in an eerily childlike voice, "Puppy, daddy, puppy." Part 3. In response to last time's case, someone asked if I ever feared for my life, allowing strangers, often dangerous ones, into my home. The short answer is yes, but I take precautions. I always carry a gun on me, but I had some individuals try to harm me at the beginning of all this. Now I make it clear during the phone interview that I will be armed throughout the in-person meeting. Things have gone smoothly since then, for the most part. I suspended this rule once at the request of a client, but only after she made it clear that I would be zip-tying her. In retrospect, I was probably in the most danger in that instance, but that's a story for another day. Instead, today I want to recount the story of a client who didn't make me fear for my life, but rather made me fear for my very existence, if that makes any sense. I've heard so many horrifying stories that I've essentially become numb to abject horror. but there was something about his story that sent a chill down my spine. I estimate he was on my sofa about a year ago. When I met Mr. Vance at the threshold, the first thing I noticed was his complete lack of facial expression. Normally, I'm greeted at least with an instinctual smile upon opening the door, despite the grim circumstances. I was surprised but not entirely put off by this, so I greeted him and stepped aside to let him in. As he passed me, his left side brushed the door frame. However, it didn't seem to cause him much pain, so I disregarded it. "If you'd like, you can take off your coat and set your things down next to the sofa," I offered. His face remained blank as he responded, "Thank you for the offer, but I think I'll keep my coat on." As we proceeded into the living room, I observed him using a cane. He walked slowly with a pronounced limp. I myself am quite fast-paced, so I adjusted my speed a bit. When he reached the sofa, he propped the cane against it before reaching his right arm behind him to slowly sit down on the cushion. I took my usual seat to face him. The man settled into the sofa before asking, "So, should I begin explaining why I'm here?" "Yes, but first, there's the matter of payment to settle," I replied. He nodded. "Right. Yes, I apologize, my memory isn't what it used to be." The man was certainly older than me, perhaps in his 50s, but not so much so that I felt he was at the age where memory begins to fade significantly. He reached into his right pocket to retrieve a wad of cash held together by a rubber band, and I accepted the payment. "Thank you, Mr. Vance. You can begin whenever you're ready." "By my outward appearance, I suppose you could infer that I'm not in perfect health," he began. "A few years ago, I suffered a major stroke. I've never been a scientifically minded person, so I don't truly understand what happens when one has a stroke. Essentially, a blood clot got stuck in my brain and cut off oxygen, which feeds the brain and gives it the ability to perform necessary tasks. The stroke attacked the right side of my brain, manifesting in physical deficits on the left side of my body. It also altered my ability to recall memories or simply to think in general." I nodded in response. The man traced his finger along the length of his cane. "Now, I don't want you to think that I'm here simply because I had a stroke. I actually gained a lot of perspective after that happened. I'm here for an entirely different reason." I leaned forward. "Oh, and why is that?" "Left hemispatial neglect," he stated simply, a look of confusion spreading across my face. "I want you to imagine that you wake up in a hospital bed, you don't know where you are, and then a doctor walks in and tells you that you've grown an entirely new arm." I shifted slightly at the thought. I believe I'd find that very unsettling. "Yes, that's essentially what happened to me." He paused for a moment to let the unsettling thought sink into my mind, before continuing. "The doctor held up my left arm in front of me and asked, 'Whose arm is this?' I told him, 'It must be yours, doctor, because it's certainly not mine.' He gave a short laugh, though his expression didn't change much. I gestured for him to continue as I guessed, 'Is there something wrong with your vision?' 'I wish it were that simple,' he sighed. 'My eyes are perfectly fine. The problem lies within the brain. It simply doesn't believe that the left side of the world exists anymore. This is very common with the type of stroke I had, and that's why I bumped into the door frame on the way in. I've made a lot of progress thanks to a lot of rehabilitation, but new environments are harder to navigate. First, I had to put effort into logically understanding that the left side was actually there. However, it took even more effort to truly begin acknowledging it again. It's a daily struggle, but I've made more progress than my medical team initially predicted." "I'm so sorry, Mr. Vance. That must be incredibly difficult. Honestly, I can't imagine." He shook his head slowly. "You have no idea. I had to retrain myself how to properly observe my surroundings," he explained, illustrating this by looking all the way to his right, then slowly rotating his head until his chin touched his left shoulder. "It's exhausting, but that's not why I'm here either." I tilted my head to the side. "Can you explain further?" I offered cautiously. The man exhaled a long breath before continuing. "It's what I saw on the left when I finally started to look." "And what did you see?" I asked, my interest rapidly peaking. "Simply put, everything," he stated vaguely. "The brain is an incredibly complex organ. Most of the time, we don't realize all that it does for us. When one takes in visual information through the eyes, the brain filters out unneeded stimuli to allow one to focus on what's immediately important. The mind also fills in minor details with what it expects should be there based on context and experience. There's a literal blind spot in the eye where the optic nerve passes through it. The brain compensates for this, filling in the image with contextual information to create a smooth, clear picture. I nodded to demonstrate that I was beginning to understand. The man explained in detail, because my brain was still struggling to believe that the left side of the world existed, it wasn't performing those tasks correctly when I forced myself to pay attention to the left. At first, it was incredibly overwhelming, a complete sensory overload. However, the brain also has an amazing capacity to rewire itself, so with a lot of time and effort, the sensory input from my left side became much more manageable. I could filter out more information than before, but my brain was still seeing the left as if it were an entirely new universe. It simply didn't accept that the left side was part of the same world I saw on the right. It still wasn't filtering things properly, and it wasn't filling in the blanks based on what I'd always known to be true. "What do you mean?" I urged, crossing my legs and resting my chin on one hand. "At first," he said with an incredulous laugh, "I thought it was a blessing. I saw what I assumed to be angels, translucent beings filled with light. I only truly understood what they were when I recognized one of them. It was my mother's ghost." I recoiled in shock. "My goodness," I could only think to say. He nodded, confirming my reaction. My goodness, indeed. At first, I didn't believe it was actually her. But when she finally spoke to me, she knew everything about my mother about me. She instructed me to pull up one of the floorboards in our home, where I still reside, and told me to find a box. I followed her instructions and found a box of her old mementos, some money. I'd never known about it before, so at that point, I knew it had to be her. "Did you ever see her again?" "I wish, but I think she found peace by saying whatever she needed to say, or simply by seeing me one last time before she left this world completely. I kept looking for her, but I never spotted her again. I only saw that multitude of wandering spirits." He paused for a long while before adding, "Well, that's not entirely true." I gestured for him to continue, wanting nothing more than for him to reveal the full truth. "Every now and then I'd catch a flicker of movement within the crowd of ghosts. I can only speculate, but I assume these things are better at hiding than the spirits because I've only recently started to fully see them. At first, I didn't think much of it, but now they are unavoidable. These creatures are too obscene, too horrific to accurately explain. We simply don't have the words available in our language to describe them. Because we shouldn't see them at all," he disclosed. "But I will try my best. They all look different. Some walk on 4 legs or 6 or 20, while others stand on 2 like you and me. They are just human enough to understand their compositional shape, only completely grotesque. Some are a bloody mess with rotting body parts stitched together in the cruelest abstract artwork you can't even fathom. I saw one that was just a pulsating sphere of flesh completely covered in mouths. Its slick tongues lolled in every direction." I shivered at the mental image. Recently, I saw one that was just a torso with a single arm dragging across the floor toward me. Its back was embedded with eyes of all shapes and sizes, each one operating independently of the others. He recalled another, a writhing worm of flesh with a mouth at one end, essentially just a spiral of yellowing teeth, another still completely covered in overlapping fingernails that gave it the appearance of such. Still another, a headless torso scuttling crab-like across by the hands that terminated each of its 4 limbs. I could go on for pages, and I still wouldn't even begin to scratch the surface. An overwhelming sense of dread consumed me. "You don't have to, Mr. Vance, it's all right." He locked his eyes into mine. "The ghosts, they eventually disappear. The general multitude of spirits still exists, but the individual manifestations change over time. They leave just as my mother did. Whatever these beasts are, they remain in this world. They actually multiply. Sometimes I see them mating," he explained with an audible shudder. "They're always here. Perhaps always have been. Perhaps always will be. I just happen to be the only one who sees them." I feel like I'm going to vomit at any moment. Worse still, I think these creatures are beginning to recognize my presence. A few days ago, a beast alternating between walking on 2 legs and scuttling on 10 arms opened wide the giant cavern of a mouth that occupied its entire face. It shrieked at me, deafening, like fingernails on a chalkboard. He paused to shrug off his jacket in slow, deliberate movements. "Just yesterday, a torso with a head at either end and a pair of arms scurried close to me and clawed me," he disclosed, revealing a series of raised scratches running down his left arm. the sight of the wounds deeply disturbed me. For the first time, I found myself wishing a client's story would just end. His face still blank, he began to weep. This newfound sight, this unveiling, it has utterly destroyed me. I no longer believe in heaven or hell. The spirits just muddle about in this world until they find peace. I'm not sure what happens to them when they finally leave this realm, but it has to be better than this. I'll help you get there, I assured him. Please lie down, I'll prepare the injection. The man silently lay back on the sofa, and as I prepared the procedure, I returned with the needle and tourniqueted his arm to find a suitable vein. Before we begin, do you have any parting words or wishes? I inquired, leaning over him, tears still streaming from his eyes. Could you put a cloth or something over my eyes? The crab crawler is here, and I can't bear to look at it as I go. This is the only story I wish I had never heard. The story that I obsessively reassure myself isn't true. However, every time I notice a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye, I always think of the crab crawler. Part 4. I rummaged through my notes for this particular file, hoping you all would enjoy reading it. This was one of my earlier cases, at the beginning of my partnership with law enforcement, and it's incredibly significant to me. It involved an old man known to be unsettling in my community. The kind of man who leers at teenage girls and receives very few trick-or-treaters each Halloween. Aside from the thinly veiled perversion, he seemed pretty harmless, and for this reason, I was taken aback when he contacted me. But mostly, I was just curious to hear his story. This case involves child sexual violence, so I caution you to skip this story if that will be difficult for you. Mr. Silas arrived at my apartment for his scheduled appointment in a shiny white button-down shirt and a pair of athletic pants. I couldn't imagine wanting to meet death in this state, but I also understood the desire to be comfortable in one's final hours. I greeted him, and he grunted in response as he shuffled past the entryway. I gestured towards the living room as I offered, "You can set your things down and sit on the sofa." The man crept to the sofa and slowly lowered himself onto it. "So, $5,000, right?" I followed him into the living area, confirming. "Yes, sir." He pulled a bulging envelope from inside his jacket and offered it to me. "Strange way to make a buck, little girl," he stated. "Certainly not a suitable profession for a lady like yourself." I found myself adjusting my blouse, wishing I'd worn something a little more modest, like a turtleneck. "Well, here you are," I offered with a shrug. The man gave a crude laugh. "Fair enough, whenever you're ready, sir," I said with a half-smile. The reason I'm here, I'm sure you've heard the rumors about me. I'm a perverted old man. I'm a creepy old man, dangerous, so keep the kids away from me," he scoffed, throwing up his arms in mock horror. I pretended I hadn't heard these exact phrases as I shook my head. "No." The man glared, perhaps at my feigned naivete. "Well, I'm here to tell you that the rumors are absolutely true," he began, looking me directly in the eyes. "When I was younger, it was much easier to deal with it. There was no shortage of 14-year-old girls who thought dating a man in his early 20s made them mature or special. Little princesses incapable of realizing I was taking advantage of them. As I got older, however, closer to 30 and beyond, it was an entirely different story. I'd completely lost my appeal to young girls, and that's when the term pervert was truly branded on my forehead," he explained, patting one hand against his forehead to emphasize the point. I crossed my legs as I asked, "How did you react to that?" "Not well," he exhaled. "I quickly lost control of myself. I molested my niece when she was 12. I lied to her, explaining that it was normal and expected for uncles to teach their nieces about becoming women, and so it went on for years. She'd often visit on weekends, and I'd have my fun with her." He paused for a moment before adding, "Until my sister caught me and her daughter in bed together." The weekend visits stopped after that, and then my entire family cut off contact with me. However, the incident was never reported to the police. It took an immense amount of self-control to maintain my neutral expression. The man shifted on the sofa before continuing. "After that close call, I tried to rein in my unorthodox desires and succeeded for a time. I suppose that ended when I first laid eyes on Jessie. Such a spry little thing with platinum blonde hair and legs that never seemed to end," he exhaled. "At first, I capitulated slowly, only allowing myself small concessions. I reasoned that having my afternoon coffee on the porch so I could watch her walk home from school was acceptable. Then I allowed myself to attend her soccer games as they were public events. She moved so gracefully on that field, he mused, looking off into the distance. From there, it was a rather slippery slope, as they say. What do you mean? I asked hesitantly, raising an eyebrow. Essentially, I was able to justify a long list of rationalizations that led to simply taking the little girl, he disclosed, leaning forward into the conversation. You see, Jessie was a creature of habit. She walked the same route every day, reliably using the same shortcut through a wooded area each day. I took her there, sneaking up behind her. I pressed my pistol into her back and ordered her into my car. I absconded with her to a remote cabin I'd acquired after my father passed away, he described, wringing his hands. I spent the next few days with her in utter bliss. She cried but didn't put up much of a fight. Eventually, however, I became paranoid that she would escape from me, so I decided to eliminate that possibility. I wrapped my hands around her creamy white neck and squeezed the life out of her. I shivered, simply nodding in response. He let out a long sigh. I watched the final signs of life leave her bulging eyes. Then I was just consumed by severe, irrepressible loneliness. Things turned ugly after that, he warned. I did some renovations to my basement. In essence, I built a dungeon. I laid a soiled mattress on that cold floor and affixed shackles to the wall. I reinforced the door with multiple sturdy locks, and then I went hunting. Hunting? I asked. My next girl, he clarified. It didn't take long. A few weeks later, Carmen was mine. I kept her for a long time, ignoring her pleas for release. She was certainly a feisty little thing, he recounted with a reminiscent laugh. The longer I concealed her without consequence, the more my confidence blossomed. One day, I walked into the basement, but not to engage with Carmen. I set about preparing the space to accommodate more girls, with Carmen throwing insults at me the entire time. I furrowed my brow. How many more? He glanced down at his hands, silently counting before throwing up his hands in a shrug. Over the years, at least 10, I started going out of town to avoid raising suspicion on myself. I could keep 3 girls at once, and my basement was always full, except for the periods between girls. My interest dwindled as they aged. When a girl's time was up, I would quietly walk down the stairs and force her to lie on her back. I would straddle her chest, take her neck in my hands, and asphyxiate her while my other girls watched, sobbing hysterically, he stated. I simply stared at the man. There were issues over the years, of course. Some of my girls became pregnant, and I would brutally beat them, kicking their stomachs to force a miscarriage. Another time, in a moment of weakness, one of my girls seduced me into unshackling her to let her stretch her legs. She lunged for the door, but it was locked, of course. This infraction had to be punished, so I starved her for a week before serving her a plate of her own parts. I still wanted to keep her, because she was incredibly striking, so I continued to feed her. But only after I severed both of her Achilles tendons. She shrieked with such intensity as I cut the structures that she couldn't speak for days afterward, he declared, his eyes watering slightly. She got a severe infection afterward because I hadn't sterilized the blade or provided adequate aftercare. She begged for medical treatment, but there was no way. Regrettably, I had to put her down early. I felt terrible for the young girl, but gestured for him to continue. He collected himself before continuing. Eventually, I became too old to continue hunting. My strength and coordination weren't what they used to be. No girls left, but I kept a box containing their locks of hair. Each lock tied with a different colored ribbon. I still visited in the cabin every now and then. If it's been so long, why are you here? I asked, hopeful. I received a call from the police earlier this week, asking for an interview related to Jessie's disappearance. Apparently, they're revisiting the cold case, and I was a suspect back in the day. It's bringing back all those old, ugly feelings. I was hopeless from the start. I simply couldn't control myself when it came to the things I did. Those girls died because of me, it's a simple fact, he commented, tapping one foot nervously. I locked my eyes into his as I asked, what did you do with Jessie and the others? Sighing, he recalled, I dismembered them, stuffed the pieces into barrels, before burying them in an isolated area. I imagine my girls must have heard the sound of the saw tearing through flesh and bone, splintering from down in the basement. Where did you take them? Was it near your cabin? I urged, leaning forward. He scoffed. Are you a cop? Does it matter? They're gone, buried 6 feet under. Except for Jessie, I doubt anyone is looking for them. I carefully chose bad girls, runaways, drug users. Some of their parents were probably relieved their daughters never came home. I nodded in acknowledgement. All right, Mr. Silas, please lie down. I'll prepare the injection. The man relaxed onto his back as I walked away to prepare the procedure. I returned with the needle in hand and set about the task of locating a suitable vein. With an exhausted sigh, I asked, "Any last words or wishes?" The man nodded slowly. "Please, don't tell anyone about that damn box." Many have been curious about how I dispose of the bodies after the procedure, so I'll elaborate here. Despite the illicit nature of my operation, I maintain a close partnership with law enforcement. Many of my clients are older police officers, and I contribute to society's safety in a roundabout way. One or two police officers usually report to my residence in plainclothes when I call them. This particular night, there was only one. After an abrupt knock on the door, I found a petite woman with short brown hair and a pair of wire-rimmed glasses waiting outside my apartment. I immediately recognized her from previous pickups as an officer who seemed to despise my practice. I stepped aside, allowing her in. "Damn it, seriously, we were about to catch this guy," she remarked incredulously as she recognized the man's body. I shrugged, saying nothing, simply pointing toward the sofa where the man still lay. The female officer sighed in frustration before moving to collect the body. She bent down to get a closer look. "Wait, what? He's not dead. He'll wake up in a few hours." "Shouldn't remember any of this either," I responded, a slow smile spreading across my face. She glanced back at me, her confusion evident. "I don't understand. Why didn't you kill him? Isn't this literally your job?" I walked toward her, closing the distance between us. "I know we don't always see eye to eye on what I do, but I have a conscience." He wasn't remorseful for what he did. Throughout his story, I observed that he showed no signs of repentance. He simply didn't want to rot in a cell. I offer my services to people who have done terrible things. I won't deny that fact, but I only serve those who are consumed by guilt from their actions to the point where they can't go on living. The female officer put her hand on her hip, craning her neck to meet my gaze. "The damn box," I added, satisfied with my deception. He didn't want to reveal where he'd hidden the poor girl's remains, but he owns a cabin out in the woods. Look for a box. It'll give you everything you need to arrest him. Part 5. My last 4 cases have all been stories from men. I want to clarify that this is entirely coincidental, as I encounter many women in my profession. I think it's time to share a story from one of my female clients. By the way, I apologize for my absence this past week. I met this client a few days before the holiday season and decided to take her advice to spend quality time with my family. I'm typing this case on the plane home, a vodka soda in hand, so please excuse any errors. After a gentle knock on the door, I unlatched and opened it to find an older woman, very petite, almost frail. She greeted me politely with a half-smile. I returned the gesture before stepping aside to allow her passage through the entryway. "Ma'am, you can sit down and leave your purse on the sofa over there," I called after her as she proceeded into the living room. For such a delicate woman, she moved quickly, as if running late for her appointment with death. "Thank you, dear," she responded softly as she carefully lowered herself onto the sofa. I pulled my usual chair to face the woman before taking my seat opposite her. "Before we begin, do you have the payment we discussed over the phone?" The woman nodded quickly. "Yes, dear, I managed to scrape together enough," she commented, reaching for a small, heavily beaded bag. She pulled out a red envelope and offered it to me. I was afraid of being stopped by the police with such a large amount of cash, so I disguised it in an old anniversary card from my husband. The woman said, shaking her head in disbelief at her own paranoia. I opened the envelope, looking inside to verify the woman's explanation. "Ma'am, I've never received a payment quite like this," I observed aloud, a slow, careful smile spreading across my face. "Whenever you're ready, you can begin your story." "Well," Mrs. Gable began, pausing to sniffle a few times before continuing. "My husband just passed away right before the holidays. He was the only man I'd ever been with. We'd been together since we were children. I'd never been alone before. I moved straight from my childhood home into his home. His death was unexpected, and now I'm left alone in our house." I rested an elbow on the armrest of my chair, propping my chin with the space between my splayed thumb and forefinger. "I'm so sorry for your loss. I offered, fairly certain I wouldn't be taking her as a client at this point. Thank you, dear, the woman responded earnestly. However, if you knew what kind of man he was, I think you'd retract that apology instantly. My ears perked up a bit at this development. He was a bad husband to you, I guessed. No, dear, he was the best husband a woman could ask for, she countered with a laugh, throwing up a hand in disbelief. Various pieces of jewelry adorning her wrists and hands jingled with the movement. Sure, I didn't see him as much as I would have liked, but he worked tirelessly to provide me with the life he insisted I deserved. He often worked extra hours. He didn't make a lot of money, but he kept us comfortable, and I was incredibly grateful to him for his dedication and efforts. I tilted my head to the side, unsure what to expect. Perhaps sensing my confusion, the woman rushed to fill the silence. I was completely overwhelmed with preparations after my husband passed. We didn't have children. I was never able to bear children, sadly. But other family members were laying claim to some of his old mementos. That, of course, meant I had to go looking for them, she recalled, her voice hardening. I was instantly transported back to the frustration, the devastation of sorting through my late girlfriend's belongings to locate each specific item a friend of hers desired. That must have been incredibly difficult for you. It certainly was, the woman sighed. However, I'm strangely grateful now that I had to do it. Oh, why is that? I inquired. The woman lowered her head. What I found, I think I'd rather know now than later, helping with the grief and all that. I gestured for the woman to continue. I was wading through some of our old belongings in the attic when I found a locked chest completely unfamiliar to me, she recounted. However, I'm stubborn as hell, so I got some tools from the shed and smashed right through that lock. I was astonished to find it filled with old VHS videotapes. I raised an eyebrow as I asked, "Did you watch the tapes?" The woman nodded, biting her bottom lip. At first, I thought they must be pornography, she explained with a sad laugh. Then I observed that they were all labeled as home movies, each with my name on it. For the first time since my husband's untimely death, I was excited. I brought that whole damn chest down the stairs to our VCR player. Something tells me they weren't exactly what you were expecting, I offered cautiously. Now, you would guess that, wouldn't you? She retorted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Pardon the bitterness, dear, but I think you'll forgive it once I tell you what was on those cursed tapes. I popped in the first one, titled something like, "Jody Goes for a Swim," she described, using her fingers to make air quotes for the title. I was expecting a video, perhaps of the vacation we took to the beach, or maybe just me swimming in the pool, but was horrified to find a young woman in a bathtub, bound at the wrists and ankles. She was gagged with a washcloth, and a voice mocked her as she sobbed. The voice was undeniably my husband's. I choked, tears welling in my eyes. He called her all sorts of derogatory names like stupid little bitch or whore. But most of the time, he just called her my name. Then he forced her face into the shallow water and drowned her. He lacked any semblance of mercy. It was prolonged and utterly pathetic. He would relent each time she lost consciousness for about an hour before finally ending her misery. I had to fast forward through the tape. It was that long. I covered the lower half of my face with a loose fist, not wanting to betray my usual indifferent expression. The woman crumpled, weeping as she added, "I watched every single tape." And Jody gets cut. He cut off another poor girl's hands and feet with piano wire before decapitating her. In Jody Takes a Bite, he bit huge, gaping wounds all over another girl's body, severing several of her fingertips and her entire nose with his mouth. In Jody Gets Burned, he took a welding torch to another young woman's face. Her skin charred and cracked before her eyes just ran out. In Jody Goes Out with a Bang, he tied firecrackers to another girl's hands before lighting them. Her hands disintegrated in the explosion. Then he killed her by stuffing another firecracker into her mouth. The woman shrieked in distress. The entire time, he mocked these girls, calling them my name. I noticed some other similarities among the tapes. What similarities? I urged. They were all dated around significant days in our relationship. She hesitated before clarifying more specifically. The bad times. For example, Jody Gets Cut was dated right after our 10th anniversary. We'd had a terrible fight that night. Another tape was from when I had my first miscarriage. Still another from when we learned I couldn't carry a pregnancy at all. Most horrifyingly, one tape was dated around the time my sister unexpectedly ran off with a man she'd just met. That was an incredibly difficult time for me, she mused, wringing her hands together. You watched that tape too? I asked, twirling a loose strand of auburn hair behind my ear. The woman locked her tear-filled eyes into mine. I said I watched all of them, didn't I? That one was titled Jody Lies Through Her Teeth. This time, Jody was my sister, she stammered through heavy sobs. My husband brutally beat my sister, then forced a phone into her hand. She dialed a number. Can you imagine my horror when I could hear myself answer on the other end? I clapped a hand to the side of my face before asking, Your sister was calling you. Yes, my husband forced her to contact me. That horrific call, that was the last time I ever heard from her. It all makes sense now. My sister could be volatile at times, but she would never just cut ties with me, she wailed. I remember hanging up on her, so angry at the time. Little did I know that after I ended the call, my husband would pluck out each of her teeth with a pair of pliers, the woman stated, visibly twitching. My God, ma'am, I am so incredibly sorry, I reassured her as best I could. She shook her head gravely. I continued to watch the tapes, anxious that I would recognize another subject of his torture. He violated one girl with gardening shears, took out another girl's eyes, and stuffed coins into the empty sockets. But I couldn't recognize another person past my sister's tape. However, I did notice something else familiar. I wasn't sure I wanted to hear more at that point, but it's my personal policy to listen for as long as a client wishes to share. They deserve that from me. After each girl passed, he would take a piece of their jewelry, a ring, a necklace, something like that. Then he would take a large carving knife and cut individual pieces of flesh from their lifeless bodies that he would place into a piece of butcher's paper. Each video ended with him wrapping that disgusting package with twine. The woman shuddered, pausing to take a deep breath before continuing. Whenever we would fight or hit a rough patch, my husband would become distant, even cruel. After a few days of this, he would reliably return with an apology and a gift of jewelry. He would cook a meal of meat, wrapped in unlabeled butcher's paper. He would never tell me where he got this meat from, only saying it was bought from his special apologetic butcher. I gasped audibly, but gestured for her to continue the story. The sick bastard fed me each of his victims, she elucidated, groaning as if nauseated. For years, he did this, and I had no idea. He was my loving husband, and I loved him. But in reality, he was a monster. He hated me so much that he butchered all these innocent, unfortunate women in my stead. I can't bear to live another moment knowing this truth. When I pass, the police will find the tapes. I've made sure of that. Hopefully, this will at least bring some closure to their families. I leaned forward, sitting in heavy silence before stating, If you're ready, I'll prepare the injection. Please lie down. The woman leaned back against the armrest, then shifted into a supine position. She stared blankly at the ceiling. I prepared the syringe with trembling hands before returning to the living room. The woman's skin was as thin as tissue paper, so I worked gently to find a vein. Do you have any parting words or wishes? I asked, my voice low as I towered over her delicate frame. She closed her eyes for a moment before advising, Dear, you must spend time with those closest to you. Truly get to know them, because you never know what is lurking just beneath the surface of those you love most. I want to extend this advice to all of you. You can never truly know what another person is capable of. You may think you know your loved ones, but do not let sentimentality obscure reality. I hope you all had a wonderful holiday with your respective families. More than that, I hope none of you find something similar to what this woman found in her own home. Part 6. I myself have always been a rather skeptical person, but I encounter such strange tales in my profession that my predominantly logical way of thinking is regularly challenged. It's easy to dismiss the majority of these stories as mental illness. But eventually, I still find myself wondering if I'm simply trying to protect myself from what very well could be true. This is one case that has haunted me, as I find myself believing it more often than not. Fair warning, there is some extremely graphic violence involving children in this one. This case will not be suitable for all readers. Don't say I didn't warn you. I met Ms. Ember about a year ago. She was a vibrant woman with long red hair, probably in her early 30s. Her flowing maxi dress and random assortment of bracelets, haphazardly thrown onto her wrists, gave the impression of carefree abandon. But I highly doubted that was true upon seeing her at my door. She greeted me with a radiant smile and immediately wandered in as if she already felt welcome in my home. Feel free to sit on the sofa and put your things down somewhere around there, I instructed, waving my hand in their direction. The woman glided past the entryway as she called back, "Thanks, honey, this place is beautiful." "Thank you," I responded as we both took our seats. "Did you bring the money?" "Oh, yes," Ms. Ember replied, temporarily flustered. She pulled up her loose dress and retrieved a wad of cash tucked into the waistband of her skirt. "I had to sell my car for this, you know." I accepted the payment with an apologetic smile. "I'm sorry about that." "But I don't need it anymore, do I?" she joked, throwing up her arms and making a face. Her bracelets jingled, making the movement almost pleasantly musical. The woman sat up straight and crossed her legs, folding her arms across her knees. "I work security at a fancy hotel," she began. "I know, right? But really, all I do is sit around and watch cameras, call the police if something seems off. It's a cushy job. I've never had any trouble until now." "What's causing you trouble?" I asked, still trying to picture the slender woman as a security guard. She shook her head wildly for a moment, as if trying to dislodge an unpleasant thought. "The hotel actually has a rather dark history, though they've tried to conceal that fact from the public. It used to be an insane asylum for children. I have to admit, that's actually why I applied to work there. I've always felt a connection to the spiritual realm. As a little girl, I tried to contact my deceased mother many times," she mused. "I was hoping to see some spirits, perhaps get some wisdom from the other side." "Did you see any spirits?" I offered cautiously. The woman replied, "Yes, I actually did. I was reviewing the security cameras on a particularly dull night when I noticed something strange down in the basement. There was a man just standing there. He was facing a corner so I could only make out his back, but he was just there, motionless for hours," she stated with a giddy laugh. I thought, this really has to be a ghost. Perhaps one of the nurses. I was filled with excitement until he finally moved. Without turning, he reached an arm behind him. He extended a single finger and in the direction of the camera beckoned to me, she explained, illustrating the gesture by making a beckoning motion with one hand. I nodded, urging her to continue. Then I froze, but I'd been waiting for that moment for as long as I could remember. I bravely got up and left the security room. As I walked down the stairs, a man bumped into me as he rushed up. I was startled as I realized it was the man from the screen. I figured he couldn't be a ghost because as far as I knew, ghosts didn't have a physical presence, she sighed. But if it wasn't him, what was so interesting he was looking at in that corner? "Was anything there?" I asked. The woman nodded. "Yes, I crept into the basement. I thought about turning on the lights but didn't want to disturb any presence down there. I proceeded to that corner, ready to meet a true spirit." She picked at her fingernails before adding, "I was overwhelmed by that freezing cold feeling they always talk about in movies. I knew I wasn't alone." I whispered my greeting to the ghost, not really expecting a reply. "Did it say anything back?" I wondered aloud in my smallest, sweetest voice. "Just hello." It was a child, a little boy. I asked the boy to come closer so I could see him, but he told me he had a physical deformity that made people scared. His brother had it too, and so his parents sent him to live in that abandoned place, she wailed. I reassured him that he could lurk in the shadows for as long as he wanted. Then I asked him why he still resided in the realm of the living. I heard him start to weep. I was overwhelmed by the urge to reach out and comfort the little boy, but I restrained myself. He explained that he couldn't move on until someone understood what had happened to him. I gestured for her to continue the story. The woman exhaled a long breath before continuing. "I'm always incredibly sympathetic to the plight of spirits who can't move on. To be with their loved ones, I realized that I would have to be the one to listen to the terrible things this poor boy endured. That man, he clearly couldn't bear it. But I could. I asked him to share everything with me." "What did the boy tell you?" I inquired, rubbing a hand through her hair, tears beginning to well in her eyes. "The worst things you could possibly imagine. His parents were disgusted by the sight of him and his brother, so they forced their children away. The doctors, if you could even call them that, said they would make the boys better," the boy said in a steady, monotonous voice, while he detailed these atrocities against humanity. She groaned, visibly in pain. "When they arrived, they were hosed down with water and starved for days. His only comfort was his brother, though he worried they would take him away." "He told me he couldn't live without his brother," she said. I look out for him and he looks out for me. We can get through anything together, even that place. I sighed, somewhat familiar with the horrific conditions people in insane asylums endured. Thankfully, the boys remained together. Less fortunately, they were forced to undergo torturous therapies, she detailed, using her fingers to make air quotes for the last word. He described, still in that steady monotone, that the doctors would take him and his brother down to that basement and place large metal spoons in their mouths. They would feel pressure on either side of their heads, and then everything would just go blank. When he woke up, he couldn't even remember who he was. I winced, thinking of electroshock therapy, how traumatizing that would be for a little boy. Apparently, he reacted rather negatively to the so-called treatment, becoming violent in response. The doctors doubled down on the boys, explaining that they would have to try more drastic methods to cure them. He said the doctors would make me better and also help others to get better, she stated, tears beginning to stream down her face. From there, things only got worse. Stories he told me, one time they opened up my skull and inserted what I can only assume were electrodes into my brain, he explained. They stabbed me with something really sharp. It hurt me so much, especially in my neck. Suddenly, my arms just shot forward. I couldn't control them, my mouth started making this foam. Then I just passed out. I chewed on my bottom lip in anticipation. She rested her forehead in the palm of her hand. He told me he was unconscious for days afterward. Another time, they must have given him injections filled with something poisonous. He said, after the doctors gave me the shots to get better, these bubbles filled with black stuff bubbled up all over my skin, she mumbled. They swelled and burst. It must have been incredibly painful. That poor, poor boy. She held her face in her hands and wept for several minutes. I sat in respectful silence, allowing her to express her anguish. Finally, he described his death. The doctors dragged the boys, kicking and screaming, down to the basement. They strapped them to a cold metal table. She sobbed, audibly shuddering, as if she herself were strapped to the surface. They secured the proximal end of his brother's arm with a tight tourniquet. Without pain medication, a doctor sawed off his brother's arm, tossing it into a bucket on the floor like trash. The little boy was forced to listen to his brother's screams and cries the entire time. My eyes widened in disgust. The woman collected her tears on a sleeve before adding, then they repeated the procedure on both of his legs. The little boy said, the arms were horrible, but the legs, it hurt as if they were cutting off my own, even when I saw my legs below. She groaned. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't try. I'd always known human experimentation happened, but I never thought I'd meet someone who'd experienced such torture, she cried. Soon after, the little boy's brother died. The little boy followed a few days later, developing a severe infection, chills, sepsis, and finally the embrace of death. The woman sighed, sniffling. The little boy ended his story, and we lingered in silence for a few long moments. I asked him, "Is your brother down there too?" The little boy laughed flatly. He said, "Of course he is, we're always together." He asked if I wanted to see them then. I tilted my head to the side, raising an eyebrow. "Did you?" The woman nodded gravely. I turned on the lights and I couldn't believe what I saw. This tiny little boy, perhaps 6 at most, was pale as a ghost. I asked him where his brother was, and the little boy slowly turned around, revealing his brother, attached to his back, conjoined. Just a lifeless, rotting torso with a head drooping over one shoulder. While the little boy was almost colorless, his brother was a sickly green and bloated with wounds where the limbs should have been. I exhaled heavily. "Ms. Ember, I can't even begin to imagine what you've been through." She laughed through thick tears. "The worst part is that's not even why I'm here. I thought allowing this little boy's voice to be heard would heal him, and I expressed this to him. How naive I was." The little boy craned his neck up to meet my gaze with a sharp, cold stare. He said, "You've heard my story, but you don't understand what I went through. I want you to know the pain I endured. I want you to feel it." I was overcome by a sudden fear that compelled me to leave the room immediately. I rushed up the stairs, eager to escape that place. "Something tells me it wasn't that easy," I commented. At first, I thought I'd gotten away, but for the past few weeks, I've been utterly consumed by the compulsion to harm myself. The other day, I tried to destroy one of my teeth with nail clippers. Worse still, I'm pulling my boyfriend into it too. I lost control last night and crushed up a bunch of sleeping pills, then mixed them into his coffee. When he passed out, I lay down next to him, filled with an uncontrollable urge to be near him, she disclosed, shuddering. I took a large needle and some twine, then began to sew our bodies together at the waist. It hurt like hell, but it came with an inexplicable euphoria. Luckily, I woke up before he did and removed the stitches. But now he's asking questions that I have no logical or believable answers for. I'm incapable of stopping myself. I know it won't end, and I'm not sure what will happen the next time I lose myself. I leaned forward, clasping my hands together. Ms. Ember, please lie down. I'll prepare the injection. The woman followed my instructions, lying down in a smooth, fluid movement. Once I had prepared and returned with the needle, I tourniqueted her arm to find a suitable vein. Do you have any last words or wishes? Please never try to contact the other side. They're not as friendly as you think. The woman sighed before closing her eyes. This story continues to unsettle me. Not merely because of its horrific content, it haunts me because I had heard it before. About a week prior, when I put this woman down, a man had come to me with this exact story. He'd lost his fingers to a garbage disposal before he wound up on my sofa. For this reason, I take this woman's advice to heart. Part 7. Some of you have asked about younger clients, and actually, I had a rather young man this week. Probably in his early 20s, he brought me a rather compelling story, so I thought I would share it with all of you. I'm sick in bed at home, so apologize if I sound a bit off today. This will likely be a shorter rendition as well, as I need to get some rest. But first, I need to get this story off my chest. When I let Alex into my home, I observed him to be tall, thin, and a bit awkward in his mannerisms. I myself am quite the same, so I offered a genuine smile in response to his shy greeting. I allowed him passage through the door, directing him to sit on the sofa. The man crept past the entryway to the sofa, rubbing his greasy dark hair with one hand. He dropped a satchel to the floor next to the sofa and sank into the cushions. I followed shortly after, taking my usual seat on my chair to face him. I'm starting to feel a bit ill today, so you'll have to forgive me if I sneeze or cough. Did you bring the money? Without a word, the young man reached one hand into the outer pocket of his satchel and retrieved an envelope full of cash. He extended his arm, handing the payment to me. I tucked the envelope into my jacket. Thank you. You can begin whenever you're ready. I've always been an awkward guy, he confessed, biting his bottom lip. I'm not good at connecting with others, and I haven't achieved much in my life. I know I'm young, but truly I lack social skills and motivation. I work a low-paying job, live in a small, rundown house on the outskirts of town. It's a terrible place, always falling apart, leaking all sorts of things. Of course, I can't afford a place on my salary. I rent, and I have to share. I have a roommate. I nodded, understanding that most young people have to rent and share accommodations. He chuckled, blushing. Of course, I think I chose that place because of this roommate. She's beautiful, he mused, shaking his head. The kind of girl I'd always dreamed of dating, but could never bring myself to talk to. I have low self-esteem. I couldn't imagine a girl like that wanting me, but I thought perhaps, naively, that maybe if I moved in with her, she'd understand me and grow to love me. Did it work? I offered cautiously. You know what? I actually think it did, he sighed. A few months after I moved in, I went out of town to visit my parents for a few days. When I returned, I opened the door to our home to the most inviting aroma. I heard her humming, and I followed the sound to the kitchen, and there she was in her prettiest dress, stirring a pot of stew. I mumbled a greeting or something to not be weird and announced my presence. And she spun around to face me, a radiant smile on her face. She was so excited to see me that she embraced me in a tight hug. She served me the most delicious home-cooked meal I'd ever eaten, and then she practically jumped my bones. I sneezed into a tissue. Excuse me, please continue. The young man pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose with one finger. The next few weeks were pure bliss. I couldn't fathom how this goddess of a girl could be fond of a guy like me, he explained, laughing despite himself. She catered to my every need, kept the house immaculately clean, fed me every night, made love to me every night. I finally had the intimacy, both physical and emotional, that I'd always craved. I told her everything, and she was always there to listen. I thought this was it. I'd finally found the woman I could spend the rest of my life with. I assume it changed after those first few weeks, I asked. Of course, all relationships change. I guess I didn't really know that for sure, considering this was my first romantic relationship. But eventually, she started behaving differently, he mused. She kept the house in immaculate condition. I never had to lift a finger. Even with all the effort she put into maintaining it, she couldn't change the general nature of the house. We were getting flies again, and an awful smell was beginning to permeate the home. Probably some kind of mold, I said. I offered to take a look, but she didn't want to hear it. I wanted to fulfill that masculine handyman role, so I insisted. That was our first fight. She wouldn't budge, promising that she would call the landlord herself. I gestured for him to continue. The young man shifted on the sofa before continuing. I knew she was planning a visit to her family that weekend, so I waited. Once she left, I immediately set about the task of locating the source of the infestation. The house I lived in had a crawl space, and it didn't take long for me to realize that it was coming from inside the walls. I groaned, thinking some animal had gotten in and died. He exhaled a long, deliberate breath before clarifying. Something died in there, but it certainly wasn't an animal. I raised an eyebrow. What was it? It was my roommate. When I entered the crawl space, I was utterly horrified to find the bloated, decomposing corpse of my actual roommate. He recalled, looking down at his shoes. Her skin was discolored and covered in flies. They crawled over her eyes and into her gaping, horrified mouth. Her throat was slit so deeply I could see the bone. Her head was almost completely severed. The sudden cleanliness of the house made a lot more sense at that point. I vomited right there on the floor. My eyes widened as I confronted him. Your roommate? Well, not your roommate, whatever that thing was. That was the most terrifying experience of my life, he exhaled. I poked my finger into its chest, screaming, You're not her, you'll never be her, you stole her. It looked back in surprise before tilting its head to the side and backing away slowly. In fear, at first, I thought, he commented with a short laugh. Before my very eyes, its arms elongated until they stretched to the floor. The unnatural growth was accompanied by the sound of bones and joints cracking. Then its legs grew long, the creature's back curving, shoulders hunched. Conversely, its eyes receded until they were just black dots on its face. Its jaw made a sickening popping sound as it moved back and forth before detaching completely, hanging loosely, revealing the creature's gaping maw. It propped itself up on its hands and feet, and then it chased me. I felt my jaw drop. The young man leaned forward as he continued. It chased me on all fours through the hallways of our home. I barely escaped, practically flying out the door and slamming it shut. I ran down the stairs, then down the street. I never looked back. Honestly, I don't think I would have looked back either, I reassured him. I can't imagine the horror you experienced. He locked his eyes into mine. It was truly terrifying, but that's not why I came to see you today. I tilted my head to the side, coughing into a closed fist. If not for witnessing that, then why are you here? Because I found my roommate's dead body 3 years ago. And the chase I just described, it only happened yesterday, he disclosed, chewing on his fingernails. Wait, what do you mean? I urged. The young man shook his head in obvious shame as he began to sob. When I discovered her body, a good man would have alerted the authorities, but I am not a good man. Instead, I bought a saw and dismembered her. I cut her into small pieces, stuffed them into barrels, and covered her with acid. I dissolved her body and acted as if nothing happened, he detailed. I was so desperate for love, acceptance, and honestly, sex, that I continued this charade with this creature for 3 years. I put a ring on its finger and married it. I became part of my late roommate's family. Her parents treat me like a son, but in reality, I am just as responsible as this creature for her death. I completely covered it up. There's nothing left of her, and it took me this long to realize that I am guilty of this. I don't deserve to live. I nodded, slowly acknowledging. Please lie down, I'll prepare the injection. Once I had finished preparing the procedure, I offered my usual question. Do you have any last words or wishes? If something seems too good to be true, it probably is, he stated gravely, looking up at me. I'm sorry, this is probably really silly, but could you please hold my hand as I go? I did. Part 8. I want to extend my thanks to all of you for wishing me a speedy recovery last week. I'm mostly better now, though still with a bit of lingering fatigue. While I didn't feel up to writing much while I was sick, I was able to rummage through my notes to retrieve some interesting cases that I hope you all will enjoy. Today, I'll be sharing the case of a young woman from about 6 months ago. The woman, in her late 20s, appeared utterly disheveled at first glance. Her eyes were swollen and red, indicating she'd been crying recently. Her long blonde hair was hastily tied back, and she wore fashionable athletic clothing. I allowed her into my home after we exchanged greetings. Ma'am, if you'd like to sit on the sofa and set your bag down, I'll be right behind you, I called down the hall. She tossed a large satchel onto one of the cushions and perched on the sofa next to it. I have to pay you now, right? Yes, please, I confirmed, nodding. I found my usual spot while she rummaged through her bag. Once she located and offered the payment, I pocketed it. Feel free to begin whenever you're ready. The woman lowered her head before mumbling, someone, or rather, something took my son. I stared in silence before offering timidly, I'm so sorry. She shook her head slightly. Actually, I've begun to accept that fact over the years. It's what I'm left with that's the problem. Excuse me, I asked. This is going to sound insane, she warned. I smiled warmly. I've heard it all, ma'am. All right, she replied, looking somewhat comforted by this. Have you ever heard of a changeling? If you're asking if I've seen that Angelina Jolie movie, the answer is no, I commented with a shrug. The woman chuckled once in response. Neither had I until it happened to me. My son, he was the sweetest, most beautiful little boy. I'm a single mother, so he was my whole world, the only thing I cared about, and he loved me so much too. She began to weep as she reminisced about her past relationship with her son, what she had lost. He loved to play with me, always laughing and smiling, until one day when he was about 2 years old. When I walked into his room that morning, the first thing I noticed was the window standing wide open. Your son was still there, I urged, furrowing my brow at the thought of her losing her child. She looked temporarily confused as to how to respond. Well, yes and no. There was a little boy there, but it wasn't my son. He looked almost exactly like him, but something felt wrong. At first, I tried to dismiss it, but behaviorally, he was completely different. I tilted my head to the side. How different? Well, he'd acquired normal abilities for that age by then. Obviously, he wasn't giving speeches or anything, but he was talking. He lost all his words that day. More than that, he seemed to have lost his soul. He didn't smile anymore, she wailed, wiping her eyes on the corner of a sleeve. That must have been incredibly difficult for you, I reassured, leaning forward. She nodded remorsefully. It truly was. I didn't know what to do, so I started researching online. And that's where I learned about changelings. My suspicions only grew as I read. Things I'd completely forgotten about all fit with the folklore. My son was born with a caul, meaning he had this strange membrane covering his face at birth. Apparently, that's a sign that your child will be taken and replaced with a changeling, she explained, placing a hand to her face to illustrate this. I nodded to demonstrate my understanding. What else? Beautiful children, especially those with blonde hair and blue or even silver eyes, are the most likely to be abducted. And my son, he was the most beautiful baby of all, a true angel, she cried. And the descriptions of changeling children, they're exactly like the creature I was left with. Doesn't talk or smile, more irritable, doesn't want to eat. He doesn't even look at me, and it's only gotten worse with time. How so? I asked. She exhaled a long breath before replying. Essentially, he wouldn't ever speak, even though I knew he could. Sometimes he would randomly look at me and say, Mama, and he would talk to himself when he thought I wasn't watching. Changelings act differently when they think they're alone, that's one of the signs. I raised an eyebrow, waiting for her to elaborate. When he was alone, he would just sit there counting to himself, whatever he could. Changelings also love to count. One historical account I read said that the changeling in question would obsessively count handfuls of seeds, and he would smile and laugh to himself, as if the companionship of mortal humans wasn't agreeable enough for it, she disclosed. At this point, she seemed more angry than sad. Then its behavior just got out of control. It hit me, bit me, all that. I was covered in bruises for the better part of a year. I can't even begin to comprehend how tragic that must have been for you, as you remembered your son, I commented. The woman leaned forward, nodding. I realized that I had to get rid of it to get my son back, she responded, her voice hardening. I tried everything, different ointments, combinations of herbs and seeds. I even performed this ridiculous ritual where I took it to a trash dump and poured eggshells full of water over its head, while screaming, "Take yours, give me mine back." Of course, it didn't work. My phone buzzed with a message from my girlfriend. I apologized as I silenced my phone to hear the rest of her story. I'm ashamed to say I took more drastic measures after I'd exhausted all other options, she warned. One text said I had to be brutal to the child until it revealed its true identity. I did that, flogging it violently for hours at a time. I burned it with boiling water. I even placed it in a low oven, increasing the temperature until its skin started to blister. I couldn't go through with it. "So, what did you do?" I urged, tears welling in her eyes again. I caught it one day, humming a beautiful tune to itself. Changelings are known for their musical talents. I just lost my temper. I ran downstairs to the fireplace and built the biggest fire I could construct. I brought it down there, screaming and crying and biting, and just threw it right in, she sobbed. When you burn a changeling in your fireplace, it's supposed to run up the chimney and return your child. That didn't happen, did it? I sighed, offering a sad look in an attempt to comfort her. She shook her head gravely. That thing just burned in the fire, blistering and cracking, then charring completely. Its eyes just ran out. The entire time it was screaming, "Mama, mama, mama," until it died, she commented through tears. "Nothing worked. I'll never have my son back. I can't live without him. Please, you have to help me," she pleaded, tears streaking her face as she looked up at me. A long silence descended, broken only by the sound of her gasping and sobbing. I sat up straight in my chair. "No." "No, what do you mean no?" she responded, her confusion evident. "Ma'am, when I said I didn't know about changeling lore, I have to admit I lied. I apologize for misleading you," I began. "Actually, I'm quite well versed in this myth, and I understand that it has been used to justify the abuse and murder of children, especially autistic children." The woman leaned back in her seat, wiping a long streak of snot along her sleeve. "Oh, I didn't know that." "Well, here's what I do know. I know that you just lied. Your son was diagnosed with autism at age 2. You were well aware of the supports you should have given him, but failed to implement any of them. The police know it too," I snapped. "Now, this part is just speculation, but I believe it to be true. I don't think you believed any of this changeling stuff. You looked it up to rationalize killing him because you were ashamed of him." She furrowed her brow. "It shouldn't have been like this. I didn't even vaccinate him, for God's sake. How was I supposed to raise a child who can't even talk to me?" I exhaled in frustration. "Listen, there were a lot of things you could have done for him, and yet you made the wrong choice at every turn. Perhaps you weren't expecting to meet an autistic person today, but, well, life has a funny way of giving you exactly what you need. And perhaps you don't want this, but you need to see that autistic people like me can live rich and fulfilling lives. Now you get to live with the knowledge that your son could have too." Her face contorted into an angry expression as she stood up and pointed a finger directly at me. "I'd rather him be dead than grow up to be a murderer like you," she shrieked, grabbing her bag. "Oh, the pot calling the kettle black," I responded, a bit smugly. The woman spun around and rushed toward the exit. I smiled to myself as I reread the message from my girlfriend, confirming that she was waiting downstairs to arrest her. Part 9. I've been asked many times if I've ever had to use the gun I carry. The short answer is no, but you should know by now that there's never a straightforward answer in my profession. Today, I want to share with you a case involving one of the more dangerous encounters I've had with a man from about 8 months ago. Just a quick warning, this case discusses sexual assault. During the phone interview, Ethan advised me to always have it pointed at him. I have to admit, this somewhat frightened me, but it also intrigued me. When he arrived, I was rather surprised to find a very objectively handsome young man, tall with dark hair and emerald green eyes. I'm not even interested in men, but he was strangely beautiful. I greeted him politely. Instead of returning the greeting, the man simply stated, "Please take out your gun. Keep it pointed at me. I need it to be clear that if I get close to you, I will die." This startled me, but I followed his instructions, drawing my weapon and aiming it at him. "Better." "Yes, thank you," he replied gruffly, looking strangely relaxed with my gun pointed at him. "All right, good," I said, somewhat anxious. "Please sit on the sofa over there." I motioned toward the living room with my gun. The man proceeded toward the sofa, and I followed behind him. We both sat down at the same time. "Did you bring the payment I asked for?" I asked, crossing my legs. He nodded as he reached inside his jacket, pulled out an envelope, and offered it to me. "Excuse me, would you mind getting me a glass of water?" "Not at all," I replied, hopping off my chair to fill a glass with ice and water from the fridge. I wandered back into the living room as I called, "Do you want some?" I was cut off by the young man intercepting me in the doorway between the two rooms. We stood for a quick moment of silence before he grabbed me at the waist. The glass of water fell to the floor, shattering on impact. Acting entirely on instinct, I slammed the butt of my gun into his head. He crumpled backward. "Got him it, get back down now," I ordered, following him with my gun as he returned to his seat. Now I could have insisted he leave my home immediately. Perhaps I would have, but an incredible look of remorse spread across his face as he stammered, I'm so sorry. I lost myself there for a moment. Please, don't let me hurt you. Shoot me if you have to." "Believe me, I will," I stated. "Now I'm going to get you another glass of water, and when I come back, you'd better not move." I left the room again, returning with a fresh drink. I handed it to him and resumed my position on my chair. The young man took a sip, then another. "I am so sorry again." I sighed. "It's all right, you just startled me a bit. When you're ready, please begin." I settled myself into my chair, keeping him squarely in the sights of my gun. "Well, to start, I betrayed my girlfriend," the young man began. I had to suppress a sneer as I waited for him to add, "I'm recovering from a sex addiction. It's hard to explain, but sex is just as addictive as alcohol or any other drug," he explained. I'd been pretty good for a few years, but I guess it was only a matter of time before I messed up. My girlfriend was out of town, and instead of staying home as I should have, I went out to a busy bar. I met an incredibly beautiful girl there, and when she asked me to come home with her, I just couldn't say no. She was irresistible. I gestured for him to continue. He took another gulp of water before setting it on the side table next to him. At least he used a coaster, I thought. I hoped I could just forget about it and get away with not telling my girlfriend, but I wasn't so lucky. A few weeks later, I developed a severe fever. Then the blisters appeared, he described with a long sigh. My suspicions were confirmed by the doctor. I'd contracted herpes. My girlfriend left me and I don't blame her. I betrayed her. It's fair. "I'm sorry that happened," I assured him before adding, "but people with STIs can live happy lives and have healthy relationships with treatment." The young man scoffed in response. "I know. The doctors told me all that when they sent me home with some antiviral medications. I'm not here because I'm sad I have herpes." "Oh, so why are you here?" I urged. The disease progressed in some unexpected ways. He paused his story to take another sip of water before detailing. The blisters kept spreading across my genital region. That wasn't too alarming at first, as the name herpes literally means to creep in Greek. But the blisters tend to be confined to more specific areas like the mouth, genitals, or eyes. I tried to stuff my anxiety down as I usually do, but it just kept taking over more and more of my skin. I nodded. "Did you go back to the doctor?" "Not immediately," he replied, shaking his head. "I just made another appointment when I noticed some other symptoms." I tilted my head to the side, propping it with one hand. "Like what?" The young man wrung his hands together as he commented, "There's a really strange feeling that accompanies the rash. I was told there would be some itching and pain, but it just felt weird. On top of that, I completely relapsed into my sex addiction. But it wasn't like before." "How was it different?" I asked. He stared off into space for a moment, seemingly trying to find the right words to explain his predicament. "With my sex addiction, I always had some control. It wasn't much, but I knew I was doing something bad for myself, even though it felt amazing at the time. After I contracted the disease, I had no control whatsoever. It wasn't just a compulsion anymore, it was an imperative, and I hated it every step of the way. I acted differently too. I'm not a smart guy in many ways, but I always practice safe sex. After I was diagnosed, I found myself removing the condom during intercourse without telling my partner. I was never a great guy, but I would never have done that. That's literally rape." I adjusted the gun in my hand as the man finished off the rest of his water. When I finally saw the doctor, he was concerned about the changes I'd seen in my personality, because I was also developing some pretty severe headaches. He was worried I might have something called herpes simplex encephalitis. "Do you know what that means?" he asked. I shook my head, no. Essentially, it means the disease crept into my nervous system, causing inflammation of the brain and the tissues lining the brain and spinal cord. I had to have an MRI, he sighed. Of course, the results came back normal. Well, almost. The image was slightly blurry, and the doctor dismissed it as involuntary movement. While checking his eyes, the man had been fixed on the ground for so long that I didn't even notice he'd started to cry. It all came to a head yesterday. My sister took me in after my girlfriend left me, and she's my best friend. I'm lucky to have her. Anyway, we were hanging out and just watching TV together last night. I was suddenly overcome by the imperative to intercourse. I tried to fight it to break free, but my body was no longer my own, he sobbed. I forced her down and raped her. Worse still, the blisters covering my skin all burst at once, and a significant amount of small worms wriggled out of me. I clamped her nose shut and forced her to eat some of them. By that point, he was in hysterics. I stared in silence, unsure how to react. Now I know that I don't have herpes. I'm not sure what I have, but I'm harboring something that's controlling me. We know that parasitic organisms exist that can alter behavior, such as Toxoplasma gondii. Rodents infected with this parasite lose their natural fear of cats. In that way, they are more likely to be eaten by a cat, so the parasite will be at home in its preferred feline host, he disclosed. I'm not sure what kind of monstrous parasite is inside me, but it's making me unfit for living in society. I raped my own sister, and there was nothing I could do. I don't know what I'll do the next time the blisters are ready to burst. I waited for a moment until I was sure he was finished. If you're ready, please lie down. I'll prepare the injection. He exhaled in relief. Thank you. I'm not sure what my body will do when you try to inject me. I don't think the parasite will let me go easily. As I got up to prepare the procedure, I called back over my shoulder. I thought as much. That's why I crushed up some Xanax into your water. When I returned with the needle, he was almost asleep. I asked if he had any last words or wishes. Please, ma'am, just find out what the hell is inside me, he slurred. I requested the medical examiner to perform a comprehensive examination of the body after his passing. There truly was something quite strange inside him. I'm not sure how to accurately explain it. But I was informed that a long worm had attached itself to the base of his spinal cord, extending up the spinal column all the way into the brain. The movement detected on the MRI was the creature wriggling in the sulci, the folds and indentations of his brain. Part 10. I want to express my gratitude for the incredible amount of support I've received from all of you regarding my work. I've had to take a bit of a break from writing cases to attend to my own mental health, although I had several posts planned for last week. I encountered one of the most personally difficult cases I've ever experienced last week and spent a good deal of time practicing self-care. I think I'm ready to share this client's story, so I hope you all enjoy reading it. I want to caution all of you that this case involves graphic violence against a child. The woman in question was a bit older, probably in her 60s. She'd clearly had some cosmetic procedures done, so she appeared much younger, albeit a bit artificial. She had vibrant, larger-than-life blonde hair and a face full of bright makeup. Overall, she looked impeccably dressed and clearly took pride in her appearance. She offered a lively smile as we greeted each other. Feel free to sit on the sofa over there. You can put your things down there too, ma'am, I instructed as she walked into my home. Thank you, dear, she responded in a distinctive southern drawl as she glided past me on a pair of high heels. We both found our respective seats, and I settled myself in for another evening's work. Did you bring the cash I asked for? Yes, dear, she replied, reaching into her glittering purse to retrieve an envelope. I accepted the payment before stating, Thank you, Ms. Vivienne. You can begin whenever you're ready. The woman at first simply nodded in response, looking unsure where to begin. We sat in silence for a few moments before she began. Well, I'm a medium, a damn good one too. For personal reasons, I'd taken some time off, self-care and all that. Recently, however, I'd been working with a family as they were concerned about potential spirits in the home that might harm their newborn baby. I decided to take the case because I have a soft spot for children. I worried for that sweet little soul. What was going on in that home? I asked, crossing my legs. It just seemed like your usual run-of-the-mill haunting, the woman responded with a chuckle. They were a dime a dozen, really. The family heard knocking and other unexplained noises in the home, and objects seemed to move on their own. The baby's books would fall off the shelf, its mobile would spin rapidly on its own. The thing that really convinced me, however, was when I left the baby's room for just a moment, and returned to find its crib had been pulled all the way to the window, which was now standing wide open. Creepy, I responded. The woman shook her head back and forth, a half smile on her face. I don't get scared much anymore. However, the family, they were terrified, and it took a bit of convincing and a lot of soul searching for me. But eventually, I agreed to make contact with any spirits lingering in their home. We scheduled to do that last night. I leaned in, gesturing for her to continue. Before I explain what happened, there are a few things I should explain. Not only am I clairvoyant, meaning I see things that others don't perceive, but I can also channel spirits so that the people I work with can speak directly to any spirits troubling them. When I allow a spirit to speak through me, I enter a state of rigidity. Essentially, my body becomes completely stiff, sometimes in odd positions, she explained, tensing her body as if she were cramping in every muscle. She relaxed back to normal before adding, "This helps me maintain control of my body. It feels strange to have another spirit in your vessel, so it gives me a bit more power in the entire situation. Also, I always videotape my sessions. This helps me review details I may have missed." I nodded to show my understanding. "All right, with that out of the way, I can get into the main part of the story," the woman stated. "Last night, I arrived at their home at our scheduled time. It was a beautiful old home, the kind you'd expect to have a ghost or two. We set up a table in the baby's room, as the presence was clearly strongest there. I don't want to bore you with all the details, so I'll just get straight to it. When I pinpointed a presence, I asked it to reveal itself to me, and imagine my surprise when it was a beautiful young woman, dressed in a beautiful ball gown." "Did she say anything to you?" I urged. The woman nodded. "If I can't get a spirit to tell me why it's there, I won't make much progress." I pressed her to reveal why she hadn't crossed over. She explained that the house used to be a home for unwed mothers, something like a refuge for single pregnant women. They would house and care for these women and then offer adoptions afterward. I was aware of the existence of such homes. Why would that keep her tied to that house? "Well, apparently the entire thing was a facade for something much more sinister," the woman sighed. "There were never any adoptions. Instead, the owner of the house would sell newborn babies to truly sick individuals. They would inflict untold harm on these babies, eventually killing them. The spirit explained that she couldn't leave until this tragedy was known, until everyone knew what had happened to these poor little angels." I exhaled a long breath. The woman began to tear up at the thought. "The spirit asked if I wanted to know the fate of the poor babies, and I agreed. I invited her into my body so she could speak directly to the family. She was still on the opposite side of the room, but extended her arms toward me. Suddenly, her limbs elongated, reaching the full extent across the room towards me. I felt her presence enter my physical being, and I became rigid. "What did she show you?" I asked. She immediately began to weep. She didn't show me anything. I completely blacked out. She ripped me out of my trance state with a force I'd never experienced before and essentially took me for a joyride. When I woke up, I was completely covered in blood. The murdered family lay scattered around me. The woman gave a loud sniffle, dabbing her eyes with a tissue before adding, "Well, all but the baby." "Where's the baby?" I asked cautiously. I have no memory of what happened, so I went to the video recording. I watched in horror as I saw myself destroying the family, then moving slowly to the crib. Possessed by this spirit, I violently ripped the newborn baby apart, tearing off its limbs before opening its abdomen. Then, I stuffed its insides into my mouth, she sobbed. I ate the entire monstrous thing, tearing its flesh from the bones. I ripped up a loose floorboard and discarded the rest of it there. The video ended, and I was completely disturbed. But I was able to verify that this baby's bones and the bones of the others were indeed under that floorboard in a sack. At that point, I realized that I had invited the hateful owner of that abandoned home into my body. I had been duped. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry," I offered. The woman shook her head as she wept. I should have known not to take the case. Apparently, I'm very susceptible to spirits already, but spirits are known to take advantage of people in a weakened state. She reached up to run a hand through her hair, then removed a golden crown from her head completely. She placed the wig in her lap as she explained, "I have cancer, and the treatments are incredibly debilitating. I wasn't strong enough to face a spirit. I should have known." I stared in silence. "The worst part is I finally have my first grandchild. I love her more than words can express," she wailed. "When a particularly strong spirit like this one takes over your body, it's not like it holds and releases you. No, it's more like fishing. She's got her hook in me, and she'll reel me back in when she wants. And I know she wants that baby." I nodded slowly. "Ma'am, please lie down, I'll prepare the injection," She did as I asked, and I returned with the needle as soon as I could steady my hands. Do you have any last words or wishes? The woman looked up at me, a warm look in her eyes. Yes, dear. A little bird has been whispering in my ear the entire time I've been talking to you. Would you like to hear? My jaw dropped. The bird, I stammered, instantly recognizing the unconventional name. Yes, please. Her body tensed all at once. A long silence passed before she said, Hi, baby, miss me? Tears came quickly, streaming from my eyes. I instantly knew it was her, my deceased girlfriend. Yes, of course I miss you. What are you doing here? Well, I always told you I couldn't live without you, she said through the woman, a slow, half-smile spreading across her face. Turns out I can't not live without you either, I guess. I let out a quick, sad laugh. I know you can't see me, most people can't. But when this woman saw me as she walked into the room, I knew I had to take the chance to talk to you, she explained. I just needed you to know that I'm always with you, watching over you and protecting you. I stood beside you as you listened to these stories, and when you curled up on the floor crying after they left, and you thought no one was watching. I was right there on the ground with you. That's a little embarrassing, but I'm glad I'm not alone, I stated through tears. I know you can't stand to see me with anyone else, but I'm glad you have her. I'm not here anymore, even though I'm always here. You deserve to be happy. She paused before adding, I'm so proud of you for taking something so horrible and creating something completely beautiful out of it. I'm so proud of you. I always knew you'd do great things. I looked down, taking the woman's hand. Her hand squeezed mine. I know this will be hard, but you have to let her go now. I shook my head hastily. No, I can't do it. I don't want to, I cried. You have to, Angel. She's not safe and she deserves peace. These are your rules, after all, she countered. Besides, the crab crawler has been creeping towards her ever since she arrived here. It's close now and it wants her. When the woman had passed, and I crumpled to the floor weeping, this time I felt a little less alone. Part 11. I sincerely hope you are all having a wonderful holiday season. With the new year approaching, I've been doing a lot of reflection on myself, my actions, and the person I want to be. While certainly not everyone agrees with what I do, I'm comfortable with where I'm at. Moving forward, I'm determined to be even more mindful of my own mental health so as not to fall into a similar situation as the client I'm about to write about today. Fair warning, this man's story has some pretty heartbreaking descriptions of violence, in some cases involving children. I met Mr. Harding around this time last year. He was probably in his late 50s and looked quite large and muscular. He had a short, salt and pepper haircut that looked a bit stark in his black leather jacket. When I opened the door, he greeted me with a firm, almost painful handshake. I invited him into my home by stepping aside and gesturing down the hallway towards the living room area. Sir, please take a seat on the sofa. I'll be right there, I instructed. The man walked ahead of me and found his way to the sofa. He sank into the cushions with an exhausted sigh. I followed shortly after with the chair from the dining table. I positioned the chair to face him and sat down. Thank you for seeing me, Mr. Harding said in a gruff, low voice. I'm glad I found you. I've heard rumors about you. I was surprised to learn you actually exist. I nodded in response. Yes, I know I can be hard to reach, but that's only for my own safety. Before we begin, did you bring the money? He handed me a small brown paper bag, the kind one typically hides a bottle of liquor inside. I accepted the bag, opening it to quickly inspect the contents. I don't want you to think I'm an alcoholic or anything, he began with a long sigh. I used to drink a lot, but not anymore. It ruined my life. I crossed my legs and leaned forward, propping my chin with one hand. How so? The man shook his head slowly, a long drawn-out groan, clearly plagued by the memories. When I was deep in the throes of my addiction, I lost my daughter, Ellie. I was too drunk to pick her up from school. I was actually so drunk I didn't even realize it was a school day. My wife had left me by then, so I was the only one taking care of her, he mumbled. I failed miserably at that. She was never found. Mr. Harding, I am so sorry. No parent should ever have to experience the loss of a child, I consoled, knowing it wasn't enough. It was entirely my fault. If I hadn't been in that damn bar every day, she'd still be alive, he confessed. The only positive thing to come out of that situation is I changed. I never went back to that miserable place again, and I actually became a private investigator. Though I never found my daughter, I've helped many other families reunite with their children," the man explained as he reached into his pocket for his wallet and offered it to me. I took the wallet, unsure of his intentions. When I opened the flap, I found several pictures of young children encased in small plastic sleeves. I flipped through each picture before returning the object. The man smiled for the first time as he proudly explained, "Those are all the kids I've brought home to their parents. Many of them alive. Turns out I'm pretty good at my job." The man scoffed at himself. If only I hadn't wasted the majority of my life to alcohol before realizing that. "That's incredible, Mr. Harding," I said, rubbing a loose strand of dark brown hair behind my ear. His smile vanished almost immediately. "Yes, it truly is." He was silent for a moment, contemplating while tracing his thumb along the stubble covering his chin. "I'm working on a case now of a missing little boy. I'm usually hired for missing person cases because, in my opinion, the police do a terrible job. They declare kids runaways and then focus all their energy on one suspect despite what the evidence says. They don't care about justice, they just want to close cases," he fumed, clenching his fists. "I think I have a right to feel that way because that's essentially what they did to my daughter." I nodded. "I can imagine. I'd feel the same way if I were in your shoes." "Thank you for that," he responded, his voice softening. "I'd been on this case for a few months and I just caught a promising lead a few weeks ago. Through talking to some of the little boy's neighbors, a job the police should have done, I discovered the child had been seen with a local man on the day he went missing," he said. "When I looked him up and found his picture, the first thing I thought was, damn it, I know this guy." I raised an eyebrow, a look of confusion on my face. "How do you know him?" His eyes fixed on the floor, the man explained, "I recognized him from the bar I used to frequent. I'd actually talked to him several times. He often bragged about his sexual conquests. I thought he was a real jerk, but I never turned him down if he wanted to sit with me because he always bought me drinks. When I understood that this man could be a child abductor, the man choked up, tears welling. I just couldn't stop wondering if the explicit stories he'd told in my presence had been of children." I shook my head gently, allowing the man to feel whatever he needed to before continuing. Naturally, I knew I had to follow up on that lead. I was convinced I was going to catch this guy, put him away, be a hero. The man continued, laughing despite himself. "But nothing ever goes the way you expect it to, does it? So I decided to go undercover. It would be my hardest work." "Pretending to be a real pedophile," he explained, sounding almost nauseated. "Were you able to gain his trust?" I asked cautiously. He nodded. "Yes, I was sweating bullets as I reappeared at that miserable bar. Anxious he would recognize me," the man disclosed. "Thankfully, I'd changed a lot over the years. I lost a lot of weight when I quit drinking and started exercising regularly. I didn't care much about my appearance before either. I walked around with greasy shoulder-length hair and a disgusting scraggly beard." The man detailed, using his hands to illustrate the extraordinary length his beard had grown. "Plus, we were both drunk all the time. I hardly talked to him, so I didn't think he'd recognize my voice. Turns out I was right. When I sat down next to him, he had no idea who I was." "What happened next?" I urged, unsure what I should expect. The man winced. "Honestly, you don't even want to know. Essentially, I convinced him that I was a pedophile interested in abducting a child to satisfy my sick urges. It took a bit, but he eventually agreed to take me for a drive to explain everything he knew about the subject," he responded, rubbing his two thumbs along the edge of his forefinger, skin reddening with each pass. I shivered at the thought. Yes, that's how I felt. I was both anxious and disgusted. He drove me to each location where he'd abducted children. Then we'd stop at each one, and he'd describe the torture he'd inflicted on each child, the man detailed as he began to weep. He put his hands over his face, looking ashamed of the emotional response. Eventually, he placed his hands in his lap as he added, "I found my little boy. The lead had been good. The man led us to a spot just a few blocks from the little boy's house. Then explained that he took the boy when he was playing outside. He kept him for 3 days, beating and abusing him. Finally, he stuffed a bunch of leaves down the little boy's throat and kept his hand over his face until he asphyxiated. I rubbed the bridge of my forehead, aching from frowning in distress. The man wept openly as we sat in silence for a few minutes. He steadied himself enough to continue. I could have stopped him there, had him drop me off at home. I had a recording of his confession, and he'd provided me with several avenues for investigating further physical evidence. But something kept me there. I needed to know about the others. I didn't know how many more victims there were, but I was going to listen to all of them. "How many?" I asked. "More than you can believe," the man wept. I listened for hours as he smugly recounted every vile act he'd ever committed. He kept these children alive for days, torturing them, getting off on the sound of their cries. I'd endured more than I could bear when he stopped the car at a strangely familiar spot, stating that it was the location of his first abduction. I tilted my head to the side as I waited for him to explain further. "My old home," he whispered sadly. I just stared at the structure, completely dumbfounded. I knew at that point I was staring down the man who had killed my daughter, and I was behaving as if he were my best friend. But then another thought slipped in. We weren't living in that home when my daughter went missing. Confused, I asked, "Then why were you there?" The man lowered his head as he responded, "I lived there with my wife, Maria, and my daughter, Ellie, before she left me. Or at least I thought she left me. I was such a worthless drunk that it didn't even occur to me to suspect she'd come to harm." This bastard detailed every last moment of her final hours. Apparently, he played the sound of a baby crying on a recorder. "My wife, of course, went outside to assist," he sobbed. From there, he took my wife and led her to the worst fate I could possibly imagine. Threatening to return for our daughter, he made her break her own leg with a sledgehammer. This disgusting bastard laughed as he recalled drilling a hole in her skull to end her life. I'll never forget the sick smile on his face as he explained that the hole wasn't just to kill her. The man was highly agitated now, punching the sofa cushion as he groaned in anguish. "Sir, I'm so sorry," I exhaled, not sure how to respond. "It gets worse," the man said, his voice disturbingly monotonous now. Apparently, the man had been looking for my daughter that night. I just happened to be out with her at the time. But according to him, my wife looked young enough to still satisfy him. He never stopped desiring my daughter, but the two of us moved out of that place pretty soon after my wife left. "Died," he said, his voice cracking as he corrected himself. "I couldn't afford the rent anymore, so we moved to the other side of town, the bad side of town, right into his neighborhood," the man added, placing his forehead in the palm of his hand. "My daughter was walking home from school that damn day because I'd forgotten her and walked right past that bar as the man stepped outside for a smoke. Imagine my elation," he said, "when the little girl I'd fantasized about since the beginning just skipped right into me." He snarled, digging his fingernails into his palm. I simply stared at the man. The man's anger dissolved into despair again. He nailed the little girl to a tree in the woods, returning each day to torment her. My little daughter lived in this absolute hell for 8 days before finally passing due to exposure. It was cold, and that terrible blizzard last year finally took her. The man gasped through tears. He continued through gritted teeth. The man said it was like the thrill of the first kill all over again, but better. "Did you leave then?" I asked. "No, I didn't leave," the man confessed. "When you lose control of yourself, it really is like what they say in the movies. I literally saw red. I was barely aware of what I was doing, but I knew I was killing him. It took me a bit to fully realize and understand what I'd actually done to him. I took the beer bottle he was drinking and shoved it into him, wanting him to feel what those poor kids must have felt. I took a hammer I found in his trunk and smashed it against the bottom of the bottle, shattering it. Then I beat him beyond death. I don't think I deserve to live after this, and I don't know if I can." I covered my mouth with one hand, eyes wide. "Mr. Harding, that's all I need to hear. If you're ready, I'll prepare the injection." There's something I've never mentioned in any of my cases. I give my clients one last chance to back out of the procedure before we begin. I'm usually certain of my judgment by the time I make the offer, but I like to try that extra 10% to avoid regretting my actions. Usually, just as I'm about to finish preparing the injection, I'll call from the next room, "Are you absolutely sure you want to go through with this?" I let the client answer this question alone to avoid any potential pressure from my presence. This time, the man's voice called out in response, "You know what? I'm actually not sure." "Why not?" I asked, walking to the doorway to facilitate an easier discussion of his reasons. The man let out an exaggerated sigh. "Well, honestly, I want nothing more than to die right now. I killed a disgusting man, yes, but regardless of his behavior, I need to pay for this. More importantly, I can't let the truth of what happened to my wife and daughter die with me," he explained, tears silently escaping his eyes. "That's not right," I nodded gently, returning to my seat. "I know, Mr. Harding. I have to admit, I'd only sat in there for a few minutes instead of preparing the injection. I could sense a little trepidation in your voice at the end of that segment," I confessed, reaching down to the floor where I'd tucked the paper bag to return his money. Once he took back the bag, I placed my hand on his. "You did a terrible thing, but you're still a good man. You feel guilty for the mistakes you've made throughout your life. I'll put you down if you want, but I know this isn't the path you truly want to take. I respect that. The man you're deciding to become right now, your daughter would be proud." Part 12. I'm a bit nervous writing about this case for reasons that you'll understand as you read. This is a certain type of case that has been requested quite often, so I hope it lives up to expectations. I worry that there will be some disagreement among readers regarding this client, but it at least makes for an interesting story. I met Alice about 4 months ago. Upon first seeing her, I immediately noticed a large, disfiguring scar extending across one of her shoulders. Out of respect, I didn't let my gaze linger on the area for long. She offered a small smile as I greeted her, but I sensed a deep sadness behind her eyes. "Feel free to sit on the sofa over there," I instructed, waving my hand towards the area. "You can put your things down there too." The woman complied with my request, settling back onto the sofa. I followed after her and sat down on my chair directly opposite. "Ma'am, did you bring the money?" She nodded, rummaging through a messy purse filled with receipts and other miscellaneous items. The woman located a wad of cash within and leaned forward to hand it to me. I thanked her for the payment before continuing. "Whenever you're ready, you can begin your story." "This is going to sound insane," the woman warned, folding her arms across her lap, "but I can smell death." I tilted my head to the side, assessing this peculiar claim. "What do you mean?" The woman giggled at my reaction. "I mean exactly what I just said. One morning when I was a little kid, I perceived a light, sweet smell. A faint vanilla scent, but with a burnt element. It increased in intensity over the next few days, and I noticed that the intensity of the scent would increase in the presence of my parents and decrease in their absence. It was the most pleasant smell. I'd bury my face in their necks each time we hugged, just to get more of that smell," she recalled fondly. One evening, they were out on a date, and the scent had become overwhelming, developing into a sickly sweet yet acrid aroma that I can only liken to burning molasses. "What happened that night?" I asked. Shifting in my seat, her gaze fell to the floor. As they walked back to their car after their date, they were attacked. The police were never able to figure out exactly what happened, but both of them were shot and killed that night. "I'm so sorry, ma'am, that must have been terrible for you," I expressed, frowning in distress. She nodded gravely. "Yes, the scent dissipated after their deaths. From there, I understood what it meant. The scent returned to me in the days before each of my grandparents passed, and it appeared before every other death I experienced. I always knew in advance," she exhaled, "and it was a torture." I crossed my legs and gestured for her to continue. "The scent reappeared about a year ago, startling and horrifying me when I pinpointed its source. It was emanating from my husband, Robert, and my 2 small daughters, Lily and Daisy," she explained, shaking her head, slowly in disbelief. "My husband didn't know about my unfortunate ability, but I frantically begged him to cancel the trip he'd planned to take with our daughters to visit his parents. I figured that was clearly the source of the danger." "Did they stay home?" I asked. A half smile spread across her face. My husband was obviously confused and worried, but he did as I asked. I'd never tried to intervene with the sense development, the natural progression of things, but it worked. When I turned on the TV the next morning, I was alarmed to see a news segment detailing a major car accident on the exact road my family was supposed to travel on. My family came downstairs a few minutes later, and thank God. "The scent was gone," the woman stated. I raised an eyebrow in surprise. "Something tells me that wasn't the end of your story." "Clever girl," she mumbled, rubbing a lock of dark hair behind her ear. "Sure, the scent was gone, but it returned. Time and time again, regardless of what measures I took to prevent it, each time I thought it had settled for good. It would return a day or two later. A sense of uncontrollable fear and paranoia completely took hold of me. My husband was a stay-at-home parent, and I begged him to stay inside with our daughters at all times to keep them safe. Eventually, I enforced this as a rule, essentially locking them in. I can't bear to see them harmed or worse," she rambled, tears beginning to form in her dark eyes. "Did it work?" I asked cautiously, though I already knew the answer. "No, it didn't work. They're all dead now," the woman responded with an exaggerated sigh. She lowered her head and wept for several minutes. I brought a hand to my face, one finger curled to cover my mouth as she sobbed. "The details are fuzzy. PTSD, my therapist says. The scent had taken on the quality of burning molasses. Naturally, I panicked and rushed to find my family. I found my husband in the bathroom, finishing bathing our daughters. It took me a moment to fully comprehend what I was seeing. My daughters, they lay dead in the bathtub, drowned. I screamed, "What have you done? How could you do this?" I pulled one of the girls from the tub, but I knew they were gone the moment my hand touched the water. The water was ice cold, she disclosed with an audible shudder, as if her hand were still submerged in the freezing water. Still, I tried to save her life. I tried CPR. The sound of her little sternum cracking was horrific. Tears continued to stream freely from her eyes. I didn't know what to say. There was truly nothing appropriate to say. I'm so sorry, ma'am." She dismissed my words with a wave of her hand. I didn't even realize my husband had left the room until he returned with his gun. He aimed. I recoiled, and then he put the barrel of the gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger, she continued, sniffling. Unfortunately, I survived. The bullet lodged in my shoulder. When the police arrived at the scene, they found my daughters and husband dead, and him soaking wet. She pointed to the large scar extending across the proximal end of her left upper arm. Physically, I recovered pretty well, though I've lost a lot of strength and sensation in this arm. Emotionally, well, that's another story. I wonder if it was simply their fate to pass away that day, and intervention only delayed it. Or perhaps I drove my husband insane with my behavior. "You mentioned a therapist," I recalled. "Yes, I was diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Soon after, I began suffering from painful flashbacks, particularly in that bathroom. This eventually developed into a severe phobia of bathtubs," she disclosed, picking at her fingernails. She wiped away tears with a crumpled tissue from her purse. "I worked extensively with my therapist to hone coping mechanisms and eventually exposure therapy to address this strange phobia." She paused for a moment before clarifying, meaning introducing myself to the feared stimulus, the bathtub, in small steps. We started with just talking about it, then looking at pictures, eventually leading up to actually bathing in it as I used to so enjoy. I leaned forward as I asked, "Oh, and how did that go?" A second cascade of tears began to stream down her face. I was able to use the techniques I'd built with my therapist. I felt a profound sadness, but I also felt close to my daughters, if that makes any sense. It went well until I slipped beneath the water to rinse my hair at the end of the bath. As usual, I felt the water completely engulf me, and I let myself just lie there for a moment, feeling calm for the first time since the traumatic event, she commented, discarding the soggy tissue into her purse before retrieving a fresh one. When I tried to surface, an unknown force held me beneath. My eyes flew open, and I saw the most horrific thing. "What was it?" I urged. It was me," she whimpered, meeting my gaze. I saw myself with my arms splayed wide to prevent me from surfacing, her eyes wide in a dead stare. "I thought I was going to drown, but as I began to lose consciousness, guess I let go," the woman recounted. I burst out of the water, coughing and sputtering. The water in the tub instantly ran cold. I discovered in horror that I was not alone in there. The bloated, rotting corpses of my daughters were floating with me, she gasped through tears. They were practically falling apart. Some of their limbs had detached and were floating on top of the cold water, commingled with liquefied fat. Their eyes had completely decomposed, oozing and dripping from their sockets. The sickly sweet smell of burning molasses assaulted my nostrils. My stomach churned. I felt like I was going to be sick. The woman sniffled and composed herself enough to continue, though still sobbing hysterically. From there, the flashback played out almost like a movie before my eyes, vibrantly different from every other time before. I watched the other me calmly leave the room, calling downstairs. "Look what I've done, honey," she explained, the last part in an unnervingly sing-song voice. Then I heard someone rushing up the stairs, the heavy footsteps of my husband, the woman groaned, clenching her hands into fists, tight enough that her fingernails dug into her palms. My husband, he burst through the door, and his face, those little girls, they were his whole world and they were gone. It was almost impossible for me to maintain my own composure, but I reminded myself to remain professional. I can't even imagine what you went through, ma'am, I reassured, my voice trembling slightly. He immediately fell to his knees and embraced his daughters in the bathtub, holding them one last time. Their decomposing corpses squirted and oozed various gases and other decomposing fluids. I vomited into the bathtub, but my husband didn't notice me, she mumbled, dropping a fist to prop her forehead with the space between her splayed thumb and forefinger. And that's when things started to look familiar. I gritted my teeth against the tears I suspected might come. What looked familiar? She let out an indignant laugh. The flashbacks I've had before, they weren't wrong, they were just late. I watched the other me rush through the door, the moment of recognition as utter horror passed across her face. The tragic scream. "What have you done?" she wailed as she snatched one of the corpses from the tub. She tried to perform CPR. But I had already broken her sternum that fateful day, and my daughter's body was soft from decomposition. Her hands, they just sank right through, then surfaced covered in black sludge, she wailed, her eyes inflamed and red. Little did I know, I knew she had done it from the beginning. I had done it from the beginning. Her voice was barely a whisper now. I exhaled a long breath, bracing myself for the rest of the story. This time, I noticed my husband leaving the room, returning with our gun. The gun we bought to protect ourselves, our family. I studied the scene as he aimed the weapon at me, first directly at my chest, then to the side, she commented with a tearful sigh. It was then that I realized he didn't want to kill me. He wanted to hurt me. He wanted me to live with this. He wanted me to know what I'd done. The woman sobbed, pulling up her collar to wipe away tears. I felt so ridiculous for ever thinking otherwise. My husband a family annihilator? No, that just didn't make sense. Our daughters were everything to him, to me too, but he lived for them and only for them. I already knew the answer, but I still asked why she was here today. The woman laughed despite herself through her tears. Because I killed my children, ruined my husband. I want you to know that I had no idea that I was hurting them until now, and I can't bear to live another moment knowing what I did. I don't deserve to live either, she explained. She paused briefly, then hardened her voice to add, "Ma'am, I don't want you to think I'm trying to shirk responsibility entirely. I've written a letter of confession about the terrible thing I've done. It's in my bag. Please let it go with my body. You have to believe me. I didn't know what I was doing," she pleaded, clasping her hands tightly and holding them over her flushed face. Considering the options, I nodded slowly. "I believe you. I will help you. Thank you," she sighed through tears. "I knew you would help me from the moment I walked into this place and caught that faint vanilla scent. The scent only grew throughout our conversation. It's overwhelming now, and for the first time since I was a little kid, I'm glad it's here. Please lie down, I'll prepare the injection," I instructed as I hopped off my chair to do so. I've been asked to write about a case involving moral gray areas, and this was certainly one of them. The answers here were not clear-cut, requiring me to rely more on intuition. I understood that not all of you would agree with my judgment of this client. After all, she killed her children. But you weren't there listening to her story. You couldn't feel her pain, her confusion, her guilt. Growing up autistic, I had to study the behavior of others to understand their intentions. Years of doing this have given me a sort of hyperperception to any shifts in tone or body language, and what those shifts might mean. However, her final words truly solidified the validity of the decision in my mind. "Please, ma'am, please make sure they cremate me," she cried as I steadily inserted the needle into her skin. I deserve to go to hell. Part 13. I've been asked many times if I've ever taken on a celebrity as a client. The case I'll be sharing today involves a client who is the closest thing to famous that I'm comfortable writing about. For privacy reasons, I've altered some significant details while still retaining the essence of his story. This particular man was somewhat infamous in my community because he and a friend were prosecuted for the horrific murder of an entire family. There was little evidence to suggest his involvement in the crime, and he had garnered quite a following who protested his innocence. While he was acquitted, his friend was convicted of the crime. Needless to say, I was very curious to meet him last week. I'd seen Michael many times on the news, and he looked almost exactly as I remembered, if not a bit older and more worn. He was shorter than I expected, but had the same wavy red hair and blue eyes I'd seen on TV so many times. When I greeted him, he offered me the smile that had garnered so much sympathy in court. "Come in, Michael, and please sit on the sofa," I instructed, gesturing. "I'll be right behind you. If you don't mind getting out the money, I'll take it before we begin." The man walked into the living room as I turned the corner into the kitchen to retrieve the tea I had just finished brewing. I started to ask him if he wanted a drink, but was startled into silence mid-sentence by a loud clang from the next room. I hurried into the living area, clutching the teacup with both hands. "What happened?" I don't know," he stammered. "The chair just fell over. I swear I didn't touch it." My usual chair had indeed fallen over, lying on its side. I was temporarily flustered but quickly composed myself. I righted the chair and gave a strained smile. "How odd," I mumbled as I sat down in the chair. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Do you have ghosts?" he asked mischievously, a sly smile on his face. "Well, with the amount of people who have met their demise here, you'd certainly think so," I responded, mentally miscounting the number of clients I'd helped pass on. I gave up almost immediately. The man laughed incredulously in response. "You're an admitted serial killer, walking free? I've never harmed anyone in my life, and yet I was put on trial." I took a small sip from my teacup, still quite hot. "You're a free man now. Why don't you tell me what brings you here today?" "As you're probably aware, I was put on trial for the murder of that poor family a few years ago," Michael began, tapping his heel repeatedly on the floor. "I'm not sure how much the public knows, so I'll tell you the true story." Crossing my legs and leaning back in my chair, I requested, "Yes, please." "My childhood friend, James, he was always a bit of a jerk," he sighed, rolling his eyes. "I can't say I didn't love him. He'd been in and out of jail for most of his life. I guess he was short on cash one day, decided to break into this house. Rich people on the other side of town, he didn't expect them to be home. He panicked, plans changed. He tortured the couple until they gave up bank account information, then killed both them and their child. Understand?" I nodded in response. The man exhaled a long sigh, focusing his eyes on the floor just beyond his feet. "All right, now that you know the story, I'll tell you what really happened." "Excuse me?" I asked, frowning in confusion. He looked back at me, a pained look in his eyes. "Keep in mind, there are only 3 people in the world who know this, me, James, and my lawyer. I swore up and down in that trial that I wasn't near that house, but I was there that day," he revealed, wringing his hands in obvious distress. "It was supposed to be a robbery, at least that's what I thought. I was skeptical when I saw a car in the driveway, but James assured me the family was on vacation. We broke in, and James went upstairs. I heard a loud thud shortly after and ran up to check. I took a sip of tea and placed it on the side table. What was it?" I found James had struck a man over the head with a hammer. The couple was indeed home. He proceeded to tie the man to a chair. He taped the woman's wrists and ankles together and left her on the bed. She was terrified, the man recalled, obvious remorse in his voice. Once the adults were dealt with, he tied up the child as well and dragged it into the master bedroom. James said there'd been a change of plans, that we would be making more money. I watched James begin to beat the man mercilessly, pressing him for the location of any money or valuables in the house, as well as his bank information. What did you do?" I asked cautiously. The man lowered his head abruptly, his wavy red hair forming a curtain partially obscuring his face. When he raised his eyes to meet mine again, I noticed he had begun to cry. "I did nothing, just went downstairs. He was up there for hours, the entire time I could hear James mocking them, torturing them. He'd gagged all of them, so no commotion, but I could hear their muffled cries. I just waited," he wailed, reaching for the tissue box nearby and pulling out a sheet. The man blew his nose loudly before wiping away tears with it. Raising his cup to continue sipping tea, I asked, "How did you get away?" I figured I'd do the right thing by ensuring James got caught. So when he came to me with the murder weapon, the hammer, and asked me to discard it, I noticed he'd taken off his gloves. Probably had fingerprints all over it. Instead of taking it with me as we left, I left it in the upstairs bathroom, he explained. The man closed his tear-filled eyes before adding, "I also had a pretty good alibi. I had the foresight to leave my phone at home with my girlfriend. She made sure to reply to a few texts that night so it would look like I was there. And then she lied. After she found out the extent of what happened that night, what she'd gotten herself into, she couldn't live with it. She took her own life a year later. I put a hand to my heart, understanding the pain of losing a life partner. I'm so sorry about that. The man waved a hand over his face and shook his head vigorously. No, it was entirely my fault she's gone. I was so stupid, so deluded. I thought I shouldn't take the fall when I hadn't done anything. But that's the problem, I hadn't done anything, the man wailed, his tone dripping with self-loathing. I could have picked up the phone and called for help. That family and my girlfriend, they all died because of me. My lawyer was able to convince the jury and the rest of the town that the presence of my hair at the scene could have been transferred from James. I blamed James entirely in court. Now everyone thinks I'm this damn hero for overcoming a false accusation when I'm just as guilty as James. Why not confess to the police? I offered, cupping the mug in my hands to warm them. I've already been acquitted, so they can't try me again. Believe me, I tried to confess. They could charge me with perjury or something, but as you're probably aware, the man scoffed, the police in this town are corrupt as hell. They've got their guy, they don't want a scandal. I don't deserve to live. I sat silently through those horrific final hours of that family when I could have helped. It only got worse as it went on, and I just ignored it. If I can't trust myself to save a family, a damn child from torture and death, how can I trust myself in any other situation? I sat back in my chair, looking up as I considered the possibilities in my mind. You're holding something back from me, I stated finally after a long silence had passed. The man tilted his head to the side. How do you know? He asked incredulously. I've been doing this for a while now, I responded before tilting the teacup to my lips, finishing off the remaining warm liquid. Don't be afraid, you can tell me anything. He confessed, straightening his back and craning his neck before finishing his story. I've had difficulty believing this part, but, well, I guess it's getting easier recently. The man chuckled, despite himself, before continuing. I told you that I stayed downstairs during the entire ordeal, but that's not entirely true. I did go upstairs once. He held up a single finger, then dropped his hand into his lap. I placed the empty cup back on the table. Why did you go up? James had suffered a pretty severe brain injury when we were teenagers. His personality changed after that, becoming more erratic and explosive. I'd heard him rambling to himself all night and was compelled to check on him after several hours. I crept up the stairs, then listened at the door. He was muttering to himself about the sorts of horrific things he should do to these people. Should I pluck out each of his teeth with my hammer? Should I crush each of the child's toes? Such disgusting things. Then he would be silent as if waiting for a response before inflicting horrific pain on this family. I leaned into the conversation. I have to come in, I urged. I need to know what you saw. The man began to weep again, his bright blue eyes swollen and red. The most horrific thing, the man began, pausing to collect the correct words before continuing, that I could possibly imagine. First I saw James, then I saw the family beaten beyond recognition. The man spat a bloody tooth to the floor, but then I saw something that changed me forever. Standing just behind James was a humanoid shape, but not. So tall it had to stoop its shoulders touching the ceiling. Its arms were shorter than the rest of its body, so that its hands rested comfortably on James's shoulders. Its flesh completely lacked detail or other features except for its face. Without moving its body at all, its head rotated to look back at me in the doorway. I only saw two large, unblinking eyes staring back. Lacking eyelids, its mouth was just an almost indiscernible thin line until it opened to gape. A steady stream of bile poured from the orifice. It was then that I noticed that where teeth should have been were fingernails instead. I shuddered at the man's vivid description. Needless to say, I slammed the door shut and ran back down to my place downstairs like a coward, he asserted, clenching his hands into fists. I tried to push away the memory of that creature, but its image was etched into my mind. Over the past few years, it's only become more intense. I see it every time I close my eyes, and even worse, I find myself. Sometimes I catch myself thinking these horrific thoughts about harming others. I don't know where they come from, but they're always accompanied by the same feeling. Tilting my head to the side, I wondered aloud, "What do you mean?" He placed a hand on each of my shoulders. Its hands, pressing down on my shoulders, and then the warm, viscous liquid dripping down the back of my neck. The man groaned, trembling. The night before last, I was preparing for another sleepless night when I found myself with an intense craving to flatten every protrusion on my mother's face with a hammer. I felt that familiar pressure, the pooling of liquid on the top of my head. And then I saw it in the mirror behind me. It was smiling broadly at me with that mouth full of fingernails as if it remembered me. Now that I've seen it, I'm worried that I'm going to become just like James. I can't have that, he whimpered. I nodded, completely satisfied with his argument. Please lie down, I'll prepare the injection. The man did as he was told, patiently waiting for me to return. As I worked to find a suitable vein for the procedure, I asked for his last words or wishes. The man simply said, "Be better than me." He passed away without complication, but I worryingly admit there was an issue afterward. Perhaps my mind was playing tricks on me, but as I carried my used cup to the sink, I swore I saw a pair of hands, palms down, on the counter. They quickly vanished behind the end of the kitchen counter, and by the time I rushed across the room to investigate further, nothing was there. I worried not just about the hands, but what the hands were connected to. Part 14. I'm often asked if I ever regret any past clients. Honestly, I'm pretty confident in my decisions by the end of a client's story. That being said, I have one case that gnaws at me to this day. Over a year ago, I was contacted by a woman who requested I zip tie her during our in-person interview. Completely against my nature, I turned her away the moment I saw her. I couldn't explain it, but something about her just felt wrong. Simply seeing her put me into a state of fight or flight. I chose flight. My behavior in this situation was both unprofessional and utterly lacking in compassion, leaving me ashamed. For the sake of moving forward without further regret, I decided to offer her a second interview. We scheduled to meet tonight. Recently, I'd taken some time off to mentally prepare for her return. However, the sound of 3 knocks at the door startled me. Although they came at the expected time, I felt my anxiety rapidly escalate as I proceeded to the entryway, exhaling a long breath before opening the door. The woman looked exactly as I remembered, stunningly beautiful with dark hair falling in loose waves down to the shoulders of her petite and slender frame. Her gaze was intense, her eyes almost jet black. Her complexion was perfect, with features so flawless they appeared almost painted on, doll-like. "Come in," I invited, trying to conceal my apprehension with a strained smile. I apologize about last time," I added awkwardly. The young woman walked in with a confidence and ease unbefitting her small stature. The sweet scent of vanilla and blackcurrant emanated from her as she glided past me into the hallway. "It's all right," she replied indifferently. "I'm used to it. People often react to me in a similar fashion." "Did you bring the money?" I asked, clinging to some semblance of normalcy, while the urge to just kick her out of my home continued to assault my mind. She responded as she unzipped her purse to reveal the contents. A package of zip ties lay next to a large manila envelope. I reached into the bag, retrieving both items. "You'll have to bear with me. I've never done this before," I confessed clumsily with the package of zip ties. I eventually ripped through the plastic packaging with my teeth. She waved away my concern before turning her back to me, pressing her wrists together behind her. I feigned confidence as I bound her wrists together with the sturdy plastic. "Too tight." "No, perfectly fine," the woman agreed, twisting her wrists to test the restraints. I gestured toward the sofa, and my guest aimlessly walked over to sit down. Her black pleated dress spread out over her lap. "Please begin whenever you're ready," I instructed as I settled into my sturdy chair. The young woman's demeanor suddenly changed as she lowered her head to face her lap. I have the touch of death," she sighed, the sound of her voice muffled. Raising an eyebrow, I assessed her strange claim. I'd heard some strange things in my line of work, but this was certainly one of the strangest. "I know what you're thinking," she continued, laughing despite herself. "Sounds crazy, but it's true. I've always loved all living things, especially animals and plants. I always knew there was something wrong with me, so I often kept my distance. Every time I allowed myself a small pet, it passed away soon after I brought it home. I used to fill my home with beautiful flowers, and I know it sounds silly, but I loved each and every one of them. They all died, withered and brown, within weeks," she shrugged. I responded, "Maybe you just don't have a green thumb." She locked me in an intense stare. "Don't you dare dismiss me. I know there's something wrong with me. My love kills," she said angrily. The intensity of her eye contact made me profoundly uncomfortable. I shifted in my seat, a misguided attempt to find some relief. I apologize, I said softly, mentally scolding myself for my insensitivity. Please continue. I wouldn't be here trying to end my life for a few dead pets and plants, she clarified, regret coloring her tone again. I killed a person. Leaning back in my chair, I waited for further information. I loved her, truly loved her. The young woman sighed as tears began to form in her dark eyes. She was the first person I'd ever truly loved, completely opened up to. I always held back in previous relationships, but not with her. I gave her every part of me, she explained, enunciating the last few words. I frowned in distress for the poor woman, allowing myself to feel her pain. Tears began to stream freely from her face onto her lap, one by one, like the beginning of a rainstorm. She couldn't wipe them away due to her restraints. I consumed her with my love. The intensity of my touch burned her, corroded her. She sobbed, sniffling loudly. Grabbing a tissue from the box on the coffee table, I leaned forward to dab at her tears. She recoiled away from me. "Don't you dare touch me," she shrieked. I slowly brought both hands up in front of me to signal I would not attempt to touch her before dropping the unused tissue onto the table. "I'm sorry," she cried, shaking her head vigorously. "You just can't be too careful in my situation." "I understand," I admitted, shocked to discover I did indeed understand her predicament in some way. The young woman exhaled an exaggerated sigh before continuing. "Anyway, I found her dead about a year into our relationship. I know it doesn't make sense, but something inside me just knew instantly that it was my fault. I sucked the life out of her. I can't be trusted to make physical contact with anyone anymore, and I certainly can't allow myself to love again." "Do you have any other evidence? Has there been anyone else?" I asked, hesitant about her argument. She scoffed in response. "Do you honestly think I'd try another chance after that? Risk another person's life?" she countered viciously. "Only a monster would do that. I've completely isolated myself. It's the only way to be safe. However, that's not a life worth living, and I don't want to live like this anymore." Nodding back and forth, I considered her situation and the various factors that would lead to my judgment. "Please believe me when I say I can understand, at least in some part, what you're feeling. However, I just don't feel comfortable proceeding with the procedure based on the information you've provided." The young woman fixed her gaze on me, out of control and intense. "I killed the woman I loved," she spat. Before I had a chance to respond, the woman repeatedly began to shriek, "I killed her, I killed her, I killed her, I killed her." The shrill sound of her screams grated on my ears, filling me with a swift and sudden anger. Against my better judgment, I rose from my seat and retreated to the other room to prepare the injection. I just wanted it to stop. I located a suitable vein before asking for her last words or wishes. She refused, and I performed the procedure as usual. I left her leaning back on the sofa to pass away peacefully. She just stared at the ceiling, unblinking and seemingly unaffected. Several minutes had passed after the injection, and I was startled to find her still clinging to consciousness. As I double-checked the dosage, I was sure I had made a mistake. She slowly rotated her neck to face me. Something about her had changed. Or perhaps I was suddenly seeing her for what she was, her perfect skin almost mask-like. A wide, inhuman smile suddenly occupied her artificial face, stretching from ear to ear. She was wearing the black dress when she found her. The lights flickered. My hearing began to slowly expand and my vision narrowed. Her head was truly a mess, a bloody mess. Voices began a cacophony, sick melodies as her eyes rotated gruesomely. "Stop, please," I begged her. The familiarity became corrosive in my lungs as I tried to breathe and let it all out. "Are you ready to stop playing games and admit what you damn well did? Or do you plan to stay in this cycle of death forever as you run away like a frightened child?" Laura. Her eyes were fixed on me now, pulling me in like a lure. Why are you here?" I gasped. The constriction in my lungs signaled a panic attack. Composure was a foreign concept I had long abandoned in favor of self-preservation. "This isn't how it's supposed to be. Why is this happening? Why now?" "Because you need to stop playing around." She grabbed my forearm, the injection site expanding into a gaping black hole, and the exposed suggestion of black, flickering viscera looked back at me. "Your cycle ends now. You cannot kill me." "Laura, why?" I fell to my knees. I thought I would end my days on a front porch, sipping a hot cup of tea and gently reminiscing about the lives I'd taken, but never joining them in this cruel silence of a so-called living room. "Because you cannot kill pain, you cannot kill regret, and you can only run from it for so long. She shrieked, her features not moving as she said, "Time's up." Recoiling instinctively as the entity's grip tightened, I fell backward onto the floor. My skull cracked against the unforgiving wood. Amidst a searing headache and warm blood trickling from my ears, an overwhelming sadness consumed me, my heart literally aching. I looked up and watched her body tear free of the zip ties. As she distorted her limbs, breaking ligaments to free herself with an almost joyful exhale. "I played by your rules and invited myself in. What will you do now?" I wondered. Her legs split apart and her ankles protruded outward. Her toes pointed up and her knees bent low. She stooped and walked, mocking, across the floor and toward me, almost crab-like. My breathing became rapid and shallow. I started to console myself, hitting myself repeatedly as she drew closer. My pride and composure that had defined me as an adult woman now melted away in the face of something beyond my comprehension. You can perhaps understand my hesitation in sharing such a raw, personal part of an experience. In a world where we spend so much time pretending at civility, this was not a moment of pride. She began to hit herself in a similar fashion, much harder and more aggressively as her distorted legs cracked to slide her along the wood, pulling her digits from their sockets with each sickening lunge of the limbs. That smile, static, stomach-churning, remained fixed on her face. "You can shove me down as far as you want with the horrific stories you hear from your clients, but I will never leave you. I will always be here, whispering in your ear, 'You killed her.'" She wheezed, chuckling. Shaking my head violently, I retorted, "No, I didn't kill her. She died, and I miss her and I love her. But it wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault." Her insane laughter stopped immediately as a fissure appeared in the middle of her forehead, growing into a branching crack down the middle of her artificial surface. Something more terrifying was threatening to emerge. I felt it from the moment I saw the first freckle infiltrate past the pristine skin. She bent over me, her firm hands grasping my fists and stopping me from hitting myself further. The piece of skin now dropped onto my own face as the dead eyes flashed before my eyes, black, flickering again before her smile elongated further. The corners cracked before darkness engulfed us completely. I felt a hand brush past my leg as it moved over me on the floor. A loud shriek followed the unsettling sensation. Terrified, I squeezed my eyes shut. The power returned, illuminating the room, but fear compelled my eyes to remain closed. A new sound cut the air, tearing away any remaining comfort within me with each consonant. Never had a word caused me such pain to hear. It was my name, Laura. "Oh no, no," I groaned, fully believing the utterance to be just another deception, begging it to be just a trick, a sick joke, or perhaps a disease of the mind. "No, of course not. I was just too naive and in too much pain to face the truth. The zip-tie woman was right. I am a child. Laura, look at me." A voice tense with pleading and desperation. I fixed on a spot on the ground. Her scent drifted past my nostrils the way she last looked at me. We kissed, passionately, brokenly, too real. "Laura, look at me, damn it." There was no other way. My body betrayed my will, and my eyes looked into the alpha and omega of my world. The beginning and the end of all things, no zip ties, biting words, or cracked surfaces looked back at me. A new figure had replaced her on the sofa. One too familiar to me, it was Birdie. My bird. She smiled, the same pain that had taken her from me years ago brought back to the surface. "Laura, shall we begin?" Part 15. "Laura," the word echoed in the air, both distant and achingly close at the same time. I was too stunned into silence. Words rushed to my mind, but the anatomical structures and physiological processes involved in producing speech were completely severed. I refused to look at the source of the voice. "Do you want out? Do you want to give up?" The voice pierced and twisted as if jostling for position with the voice I knew to be my sweet, deceased lover, Birdie. The latter voice was equally familiar, but the insults and bitterness made it too ugly to want to face directly. My own bitter, alcoholic self, seething with anger as each syllable slid down my ear canal and infected my mind, urged me to hit myself for a temporary reprieve. I clutched at my shirt and tried to breathe, focusing on the surrounding objects and counting them. An old technique I recalled from years ago when a weaker version of myself needed to calm down. My eyes fell on the wooden table, sturdy despite its age, where so many of these cases were written, including this one. A pleasant sense of familiarity began to creep into my body. "You can give up any time you want, Laura. You just have to be willing to jump." the voice chuckled, the lights flickering on and off repeatedly. Images of something darted around as I continued to search for familiar objects, some semblance of normalcy. I saw the sofa where so many had last laid their bodies. My face the last image they saw, Dr. Miles's vision of me obscured by his dark glasses. You just have to be willing to do your damn job. So many came here with the expectation and desire to find peace. Why would I be any different? No, why would we be any different? The voice threatened to shatter my skull with the accusation. I only noticed the tears streaming down my face as the drops cooled my flushed skin. I continued, knowing that if I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. Emotions had to be separate from the work. Finally, my eyes fell on a picture frame that had fallen off the table and landed face down. I reached for it amidst the sea of chaotic pain and desperately sought a breath of fresh air. I found it the moment I flipped the picture frame. My eyes stopped watering, and my breathing steadied. A younger version of me smiled, eyes squeezed shut in pure joy, held in the tattooed arms of a woman 4 years my senior, her arms wrapped around my waist in an embrace that could never truly be replicated. I still remembered her scent, the sound of her laughter, the feeling of belonging completely to another as well as to myself. Bewitched for a moment. It was Birdie and me on our 2nd anniversary. Her long dark hair was pulled neatly into a bun, a few strands loose from her head and playfully dangling as she looked down at me, making me feel seen in a way no other person ever had. I smiled and suppressed a sob. Professionalism came first. Back on my feet, I took a deep breath and regained my composure, putting the picture back where it belonged in the process. All right, if this is how it's going to go, let's do it right, I said, my shoulders heavy but straight. I'm ready for you now. I wasn't going to ask if she had the money. I began to move across the living room with my eyes fixed on the empty seat, my chair. I waited for a moment, expecting the bitter voice to shriek or the lights to continue flickering. But to my surprise, neither happened. Instead, a gentle breeze swept past me as a soft silence fell over the room. In that moment, Birdie had swapped places from the sofa to my chair. The reality of the situation became clear as I awkwardly, easily sat down on the sofa. Her dark hair tied back, her pale skin, a cute snaggletooth smile adorned with piercings that endeared her to me. From the moment she laid her almond-shaped eyes on me and laughed at my clumsy, wrong-worded joke. She was there, not bloody and lifeless on our bed, but vibrantly alive here. But it couldn't be her, it just couldn't. I knew it because I had all those piercings in a small manila envelope, tucked away in my drawer. A sorrowful police officer had handed it to me after she was cremated. In the days following her death, I refused to move, even from room to room, without that envelope in hand. As if my very life force were tethered to the collection of metal pieces that once adorned her face. Consumed by grief and unable to let go, I transferred the spiritual essence of what made her her into physical objects. Things I could still see, hold, talk to. I understood the absurdity of my actions, but grief defies logic entirely. It was like a temporary, acute insanity. On particularly cruel days, I still cupped each cold metal piercing in my palm, counting each one as I tried to recall the feel of her hands around my waist, the scent of her perfume. It was the closest I came to prayer in my life. My eyes flew open, and every part of me wanted to weep. But I was not that woman anymore, and importantly, I made sure to demonstrate that. Instead, I smiled gently. "It's been a long time, hasn't it, Birdie?" I asked, pushing every emotion I had down to the bottom of my stomach. Anything less would have been a disaster. She smiled back, my heart melting a little more, still doubting it was me. She drew out my favorite nickname, a dirty trick, but it made me giggle and broke some of the tension. A sudden comfort swept over me, warm as a blanket fresh from the dryer, settling around my shoulders. "Honestly, it can't be you," I began. Strange not to be wrestling with the strange situation despite everything I'd heard from clients, even experienced myself. So many had passed through this room, but one person I knew was dead, one person I had buried. I shook my head, the possibility of her presence still overwhelming me. Either I was losing my mind, or something was truly wrong. Birdie leaned forward, never adjusting her gaze from me. "You're not wrong, you're definitely losing your mind," she joked, offering me that smile again before adjusting her position. "But I have another reason to be here. You know why? You just haven't figured it out yet." I tilted my head to the side, falling back into my working habit and replaying the bitter statements from earlier in my head. The gears in my mind began to turn as the picture became clearer. "All right, I'll listen. Tell me your story, Birdie. All of it, even the parts I don't want to know. She leaned back and let her head loll over the back of the chair for a moment, exhaling sharply before beginning her story. The story that haunts me more than all the disgusting accounts I've heard and recorded. For the longest time, I was able to keep those dark clouds away. They'd followed me my entire life. From the moment I was able to look up at the sky and know that black wasn't the color everyone else was seeing. I'm not speaking metaphorically either. I mean, I could literally only see dark, grayish clouds, right? She forced a smile as I maintained my gaze. She coughed before adding, "You see, I don't know how this kind of perpetual, stagnating misery affects other people. I can only tell you how it affected me. It was like a numbing agent was applied to me in cycles. Beginning in childhood, sometimes it was just a few hours. My favorite book wouldn't hold my interest, and I'd perceive any minor shift in tone as impending abandonment. The clouds above would rain or make terrible sounds when it did, but it would pass, and I'd move on. So you had bad days, and they were interspersed with good days. Sounds pretty standard so far. But I can relate to that," I responded, affirming as much as I had in her life, as I continued to do in her passing, that I understood her struggles as best I could. "Yes, I know, but eventually the numbness just wouldn't subside. By the time I was 20, I had very few days where the sky wasn't screaming in the voices of things I still don't understand, where the only emotion I knew was complete disconnection. I spent the next several years avoiding the outside world of my home for fear of hearing the clouds calling to me, the rainiest days being the most dangerous for that." She shuddered as she finished, looking out the window for a moment before continuing. "I remember the day I met you. I'd gone to the bar to nurse my sorrows. Even though the clouds were almost jet black and the sounds were deafening, I didn't care. I knew I had to be there that day. My nose was buried in a book, reading on a bar stool." She laughed, the memory now bittersweet to both of us. "A man was harassing you. You were worried about getting him to leave you alone, but quickly became overstimulated, and things were going badly. I walked in and asked you calmly, 'How can I help?' And I just watched you for the first time in my life completely focus on one thing." I finished, laughing aloud as she responded and nodded. For a while, the clouds weren't difficult to ignore, but the storm can only be held back for so long. I held back my storm for a long, long time. It came for me the night of our last argument, and I knew that was it. I was given a choice, lose you or lose myself. I felt a lump in my throat at this statement, a choice no one should ever have to make. "But didn't you lose both in the end?" She shook her head, a sad smile etched on her face. That night, as I held the gun in my trembling hand, I heard a scurrying sound from outside our bedroom, the sound of something clawing at the door, then a low humming sound calling to me. They were ready for me, and this was the reward for protecting you in the process. Tears began to stream down her face. "I wanted you to know. I needed you to know. It wasn't your fault. It was quick and I didn't suffer, but I just wanted you to be safe. I don't know how we ended up in the same room one day like this, but I never, ever wanted it to be like this, with all of them around us with the clouds overhead." She trembled in the chair, pain consuming her as I almost held back my own. "I'm so sorry for the pain I put you through, Laura. I love you. You were the sunshine that tore through my black clouds and allowed flowers to grow on dead earth. You were my damn lighthouse when each day threatened to drown me. I just wish you could have seen it sooner." "Seen what? What do you mean?" I pressed her. Our usual dynamic had shifted. Between the two of us, I was never the one to suppress my emotions. But I wasn't going to let the wall fall down until this was resolved. As I looked at her, I noticed her distant gaze was no longer fixed on me, but on the large windows behind me. Tears openly streamed down her face as she quietly sobbed. "It's raining outside. It's been raining for a long, long time. You just haven't noticed." I stood up and walked to the window. The clouds overhead were an impossible landscape of the deepest black. Streaks of bright crimson occasionally flashed from far above and revealed shapes that blanketed the sky with the most unsettling forms imaginable, though I couldn't fully comprehend them. What is it?" I rasped, unable to pull my eyes away from what I was seeing. I caught a glimpse of two figures reflected in the window as a flash of lightning illuminated the sky. The zip-tied woman stood behind Birdie's chair, her mask-like face shattered, revealing the only feature on the face beneath, a pair of empty eye sockets. Who is she?" A look of apprehension crept into Birdie's face. "Every time I tried to appear to you, she always stood firm in my way, just staring with that unmoving, inhuman smile," she replied, shaking her head in protest. I know I went to battle for you and I tried, but she just grew stronger as time passed. The longer you denied her, I had to come to you tonight, and I knew that meant you would have to face her, she explained. I could barely watch as she assaulted you with those bitter words, torturing you by mimicking the crab crawler, but you did so well. She threw everything she had at you, but you defeated her. I knew you would. Confusion still blurred my mind. The aching spot on my head certainly wasn't helping. My love, you created her. She is the physical manifestation of your pain and guilt, the emotions you never processed. I turned to face her again. I'm so sorry, I wailed. I wanted to be there, but I just couldn't. I was overwhelmed. I needed space. I should have. She cut me off gently. What did I always tell you? Never apologize for yourself. I replied with an unexpected laugh, a pleasant sense of nostalgia. That's right, Elle. She replied with that characteristic half-smile, half-broken in the context of shattered. I'm afraid I'm here for a much bigger reason than to share my story with you. Her voice cracked as she revealed. I'm here to guide you as you leave this life. I'm going to die, I stammered, both shocked and dismayed. I had just fought my biggest battle and won. How could this be happening? Yes, she confirmed, gritting my teeth against the next wave of tears I knew was coming. Birdie feigned strength in difficult situations to such an extent that she would push me away when she needed me most. I knew it from the moment you injected the woman who could smell death. She leaned into you, took a deep breath, and a triumphant smile spread across her face. As she neared death, I became visible to her. She locked eyes with me and nodded very slightly in response to my unspoken question. Sadness consumed her as she began to weep again. Everything crumbled for me in that moment. I cried for you because there was so much life left in you. There should have been more for you. You should have gone on to do so many things. It shouldn't end like this. A torrent of questions, unfulfilled wishes, and arguments rushed through my mind. I couldn't accept this. Was I lying motionless on the floor, unconscious from my fall? Was this another trick of the mind? All these thoughts, erratic and vibrating, distilled down to one word, one question. Why? You're a smart girl. Elle, I know you've noticed a trend in the recent cases. You're saying yes more often than you're saying no, Birdie explained. You're dabbling with some pretty dangerous stuff here. The crab crawler came first, but it's not the only thing here. I shook my head violently until dizziness rushed in, plunging me into a fleeting sense of relief. What the hell are they? I asked, directing my gaze out the window as I pressed my hand flat against the glass for stability. A swarm of non-humanoid shadows shifted outside. I found myself grateful that their details remained obscured. Birdie shrugged slightly, frowning. I'm not sure, but I'll tell you what I do know. They feed on pain, guilt, suffering, and most of all, death. The more they consume, the more influence they have on the reality you're living in, the reality I once lived in blissful ignorance. The living have severely limited perceptive abilities. What do you mean? Influence. They magnify the wickedness already present in human nature, twisting and distorting normal insecurities, obsessions, and resentments, completely altering their trajectory, ultimately pushing them to horrific conclusions. They feed and the cycle continues, she responded before adding with a shudder, they're completely insatiable. I know you've seen this pattern in your clients, and it's beginning to happen to you. I flinched, racking my brain for any information to support this statement. Sensing the shift in my demeanor, Birdie softened her voice. You caught a glimpse of the crab crawler in the kitchen the other night. It will be content to have you all to itself. You've fed it very well, she stated with an indignant laugh. Unfortunately, the others have arrived. You fought with your girlfriend last week, pushing her backward onto the floor. I know you're not proud of that, but that wasn't you. I was overcome by a sudden anger. I thought flatly, my eyes tracking the unsettling movement of the dark clouds, swelling and spiraling. Nothing like I'd ever felt before. I tried not to think about it, but I felt that pressure on my shoulders, firm and steady. Then there was the slow pooling of warm liquid dripping down the back of my neck. I hurt her, and I'm ashamed to admit it. But the truth is, I wanted to do more. Stating this aloud alarmed me. What can I do? How can I stop this? Birdie visibly deflated in frustration. I don't think there's anything you can do, my love, she hesitated, clearly weighing a difficult decision. I need to show you something. It will frighten you, but it will help you understand. I blinked once, and reality shifted, crumbled, and rebuilt itself. The floor beneath me, the window before me, all the things I understood to be reality appeared hazy and indistinct. I whipped around to face Birdie, dizzy and desperate to regain my footing. I was mesmerized to discover that she was now rendered in vibrant color. The array of shades tattooed on her body were almost palpable. The pomegranate tattooed on her shoulder looked almost edible. The biomechanical tattoo on her opposite arm came completely to life. Machinery whirred, gears turned. The marvel shifted to fear as a flickering movement in the corner of the room diverted my gaze to where an impossibly tall, towering figure stood. Its shoulders stooped to accommodate the ceiling, now barely visible to me. My eyes sluggishly tracked its body. An eternity seemed to pass before I finally found its face. Two beady eyes and a grotesque smile with fingernails where teeth should have been. Other creatures filtered into my vision slowly at first, then rapidly, unstoppably. A torso with a back full of twitching eyes, dragging itself along the floor by a rotting arm. A long, writhing piece of flesh covered in slime slid past me. Another scuttled on 6 arms before standing upright on 2 legs. Its monstrous, dripping maw the only feature on its face. Still another was made of 2 torsos attached at the chest, their 2 heads facing each other. One face extending a narrow, dripping tongue to lick the other's completely blank face. Another's face consisted only of 4 large eyes, blinking compulsively. It advanced towards me, slowly placing one foot in front of the other. Its joints cracked with each deliberate movement. It took a few steps before I realized it was walking backward with its head attached the wrong way. Another figure darted past me, its movement so rapid that its form was indistinguishable at first. As it steadied, I was able to identify it by its composition. A torso with 2 pairs of arms on either side. The crab crawler. It stood upright on its back arms to display a gaping, dripping incision on its underside. A high-pitched, ear-splitting shriek emanated from the cavity, making me assume it was its mouth. The sound of my name came as a comfort this time. I turned to face Birdie as she gestured into the distance. The fleeting comfort was extinguished as I followed her lead towards the window. The structures outside my home had completely vanished, allowing me to view the incredibly desolate area that lay beyond my normal perception. The storm continued to rage, with frequent flashes of lightning illuminating the scene. A stone wall was erected in the barren landscape. I was seized in horror, frozen in place as I observed what the barrier was undoubtedly constructed to contain. An infinite mass of limbs, tentacles, and tangled body parts. A writhing mess of creatures so numerous and so vast, but compressed together that one could not distinguish one from another. The contents of the frantic, horrific sea reached out in desperation toward the wall. An adult human hand with what appeared to be infant fingers clutched the top of the divider, the tiny knuckles white as it strained to overcome the barrier. I didn't want to see what followed. My concept of reality reassembled as quickly as it had shattered. I crumpled to the floor in shock and horror. "I'm sorry you had to see that," Birdie apologized. "I needed you to understand the gravity of the situation. From the eyes your doctor saw in his patient to the creatures the man on the left saw. All the things you've heard, these beasts are truly coming and you're helping them through. They've got their hook in you. Each client's suffering and eventual death brings them closer. They're tracking the scent of death, and it's emanating from you, drawing them in like a lure." I sobbed on the floor, speechless. "They've got their hook in you," she sighed, her voice cracking under the weight of her words. "If you stay, I can guarantee you'll destroy everything you love. You'll destroy her." She raised a finger to point at a second picture on the wall depicting myself with my current girlfriend, equally drunk and in love, a love I never in my wildest dreams believed I would find again. Jumping straight to an instinctive resolve to live compelled me to rebel against this assertion. A final fight. I'm not ready to die. I don't want to die. I will not make this judgment." Birdie abandoned her seat on the sofa, gliding to the other side of the room to the record player to press play. "You already have, my love," she countered, gesturing to the ready injection in my hand. Stunned by this revelation, my eyes flew open. I couldn't recall preparing the injection at all. It seemed I had. I confirmed, surrendering. Emotions had to be set aside, as always. By the time you read these lines, I will likely be gone. It appears my unwillingness to confront my darkest truths failed to protect me, instead guiding me to this unfortunate end. Sharing my journey with all of you has been the opportunity of a lifetime. But my opportunity has come to an end, yours has not. I will leave you with this. If you find someone worth holding onto, never, ever let them go. Meaning, until the inevitability of death arrives, loving and letting go in the same breath is fine. Be stronger than I was. If there's another life beyond this one, I promise you I will certainly try. Come on, let's get out of here. Birdie invited with that snaggletooth smile, beckoning to me. This is my final judgment.